Madam Chair, council members, and participants, we are now live.
Thank you so very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Before we begin the public hearing, I will make the following announcement. Due to the continuing threat to public health from COVID-19, City Council committees are currently meeting remotely. We are using Microsoft Teams to make these remote hearings possible. Instructions for how the public may view and offer public testimony at public hearings of council committees are included in the public hearing notices that are published in the Daily News, Inquirer, and Legal Intelligencer prior to the hearings, and they can also be found on phlcouncil.com. I now note that the hour has come. Rachel, will you please call the roll to take attendance? Members that are in attendance, will you please indicate that you are present when your name is called? Also, please just say a few brief words when responding so that your image will be displayed on the screen when you speak. Thank you.
Vice Chair Brian O'Neill.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Councilmember Alan Dom.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Councilmember Derek Green.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, colleagues, and the viewing public. I am present.
Afternoon.
Councilmember Helen Gim.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and colleagues. I am present.
Good afternoon.
Councilmember Catherine Gilmore Richardson.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and colleagues. I am present.
Good afternoon.
Councilmember Maria Quinones Sanchez.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and colleagues. I am present.
Good afternoon.
And we are joined today by Council President Darrell Clark.
Good afternoon, Mr. President.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, and good afternoon to all the colleagues and members and listening audience.
Thank you. A quorum of the committee is present, and this hearing is now called to order. This is the public hearing of the Committee on Labor and Civil Service on bill numbers 220186 and 220261 and resolution number 220249. Rachel, will you please read the title of the bills and resolution?
220186, amending Chapter 21-1100 of the Philadelphia Code entitled Community Development by adding new provisions related to workforce housing programs, amending the applicability period, and making other technical changes, all under certain terms and conditions. 220261, amending Section 20-101 of the Philadelphia Code entitled Residence Requirements by clarifying that temporary residence outside the city, including for military service or educational purposes, does not prevent a person, including a police recruit, from meeting the residence requirement. And 220249, authorizing the Committee on Labor and Civil Service to hold hearings to examine the enforcement of building and construction code requirements, licenses and inspections, inspector caseload and inspector staffing ratios, and the city's response to worker misclassification, also known as payroll fraud.
Thank you, Rachel. Before we begin to hear testimony from the witnesses we have for today, everyone who has been invited to the meeting to testify should be aware that this public hearing is being recorded. Because the hearing is public, participants and viewers have no reasonable expectation of privacy. By continuing to be in the meeting, you are consenting to being recorded. Additionally, prior to recognizing members for questions or comments they have for witnesses, I will note for the record at this time that we will use the chat feature available in Microsoft Teams to allow members to signify that they wish to be recognized. In order to comply with the Sunshine Act, the chat feature must only be used for this purpose. With this in mind, Rachel, I want to ask our Council President, Darrell Clark, if he has any opening comments that he would like to make relative to the two bills that we are going to hear testimony for today. Mr. President?
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I'll be brief, and then I'll get out of you all's way so you can do your business. I'd just like to reference on 220186 on the housing preference municipal workers legislation, how important this is. Municipal workers are the treasures as it relates to our workforce in the city of Philadelphia. But with the rising prices of houses in the city of Philadelphia based on the market, it is increasingly more difficult for those individuals to access programs in the city of Philadelphia. We like to say that the simple reality is a lot of private sector employers, they recognize their employees and they provide certain things to them. Somebody told me that if you work for Comcast, you get free cable. Well, the simple reality is if you work for the city of Philadelphia, you probably should get a leg up on some programs that we here do. I actually tell you, Mr. Garrett told me that about the issue with respect to the Comcast issue. So we think it's important for us to provide a preference for the city workers who have carried us through not only the pandemic, through all the challenges as it relates to the city of Philadelphia and the things that we try to achieve. With respect to 220-261, as you know, there's been a significant level of conversation about police recruitment, whole issue around residency and our ability to have police officers. So during the course of the conversation, Majority Leader Parker and myself had a series of conversations with Commissioner Outlaw and her deputies and others, actually some folks from civil service. And two of the things that Commissioner Outlaw recommended that she saw as a challenge was the issue with respect to individuals from the city of Philadelphia going away to college and individuals going away to the military or some other public service. And then once at the conclusion of that service coming back and not be listed as residents. So we actually were somewhat surprised that that wasn't the case. So she asked and the attempt today is to amend that to ensure that those people, when they conclude their service, be it military or school or education, come back with the same status as when they left. So those are the issues today, and I actually respectfully ask for you all support. And with that, Majority Leader Parker and members of the committee, I want to thank you all for your support and thank you for your indulgence. So thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Mr. President, for your leadership on these two issues. With this in mind, Rachel, will you please call the first panel we have to testify this afternoon on bill number 220186?
Angel Rodriguez and Ernest Garrett.
Angel, let me see if I see you. Okay, I see you. You are connected, Angel. Just please state your name for the record and feel free to proceed with your testimony.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Parker and members of the Committee on Labor and Civil Service. My name is Angel Rodriguez, Senior Vice President of Land Management for the Philadelphia Housing Development Corporation. I'm here to testify on behalf of the Planning and Development Department and PHDC regarding Bill number 220186, which provides a preference for income-qualified municipal employees for housing opportunities. Both Planning and Development and PHDC support Bill number 220186. Affordable housing opportunities are becoming limited in Philadelphia. Providing a preference for income-qualified municipal employees who are required to live in the city as a condition of their employment is a needed measure given the continuous increase in the price of single-family homes. For example, in 2022, the median sales price in Philadelphia is $265,000, according to Redfin. This is a significant increase from the median sales price from 2017, which was $173,000. In addition, there was a 6% decrease in the number of owner-occupied homes in Philadelphia valued less than $200,000 between the periods of 2010 and 2014, and commensurately with 2015 and 2019, according to the census. It's for these reasons that we support this bill, and I want to thank you for the opportunity to address the council in support of this ordinance.
Thank you, Angel, for getting these salient data points on the record. We greatly appreciate it. President Ernest Garrett, if you could just state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
I'm District Council President Ernest Garrett. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, and all in attendance. In respect to Bill 220186, I'm here to testify for municipal employees. Affordable housing in the city of Philadelphia is a topic that cannot be ignored. While housing costs continue to rise, our members remain steadfast in their work. Each day, men and women, city workers, dedicate their time and efforts and energy toward ensuring that this city runs effectively. Our workers show up every day to their job site, even in the face of a life-threatening pandemic and an unprecedented rash of gun violence. They sacrifice the time away from their loved ones, all in an effort to perform their duties. All of our members are required to reside in the city of Philadelphia city limits. Unlike some who have an opportunity to provide for a safer quality of life, that isn't a situation afforded us an opportunity. The harsh reality is many of DC 33 members will not earn enough money to afford to purchase a home in the city that they work for, unless legislators like yourselves take action. This bill will literally open the doors for some of our members and their families by giving them a preference to income qualified municipal employees when purchasing homes under this housing program. We must also keep in mind that while many may embrace this program, we must take notes and learn from it. This program, unfortunately, will not be the answer for all workers in need, but however, it is our hope that this is the first of its kind. It is my hope that our lawmakers continue to recognize the plight of District Council 33 members and municipal employees and their families and create an opportunity for them to live decent lives and decent homes. They work for this city. They are required to live in this city. And that all we're asking is that you let this bill go through passage so that some of them can have a better quality of life. This workforce housing program are absolutely necessary in the city of Philadelphia. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Garrett and Mr. Rodriguez, for your testimony. I want to just ask for the record, President Garrett, do you have any stats or are there any numbers relative to the number of District Council 33 members who are homeowners versus renters? And if you don't have that stat right now, that's fine. But if you could get that information to the sponsor, the office of our president, that would be really helpful, Mr. Garrett, because now we'll have a hard number. And as you stated, this just shouldn't be the be-all, end-all, right? This should only be the beginning of developing more opportunities to assist Philadelphia's workforce, and not just our workforce, but I want to be intentional here. Philadelphia's workforce that are undoubtedly and assuredly residents of the city of Philadelphia, and that's got to be, a big deal. And I appreciate you putting that information on the record.
Madam Chair, thank you. And if I could tell you how energized that one press conference has. We received, our phone lines almost crashed over the weekend with the amount of calls that our members have been calling, trying to figure out where they sign up. I mean, the city, we haven't had a response when people were given $500 for COVID shots. There's nothing I've done in the 2 years that have gained a response from members like this has. Nothing. In 2 years, our phone has been ringing off the hook. And early this morning, we sent over messages telling people just relax. We're going to get all the information to you as soon as possible.
So no, and President Garrett, we also thank you for getting that information on the record, because it affirms that access to home ownership and the ability to begin building generational wealth, that is something that is desired by Philadelphians, right, across the board. And so even though there are folks now who we know are renting, we should never rest our laurels, right, on that. We should do everything that we can to make sure as many of us as possible are homeowners. So thank you for getting that on the record. Chair now recognizes Councilmember Sanchez for questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Along those lines, President Garrett, I think it's real important for the record. We have a housing action plan and where your membership falls as it relates to this, right? This morning I was having a meeting with the crossing guards. What are the average salaries of some of these very important public sector jobs that you represent, so that people get an idea that we are not only prioritizing, but really you are part of those when we talk about particularly average medium income, of a crossing guard, of a water department worker or a sanitation worker. Can you give us the average salaries? Because just like everybody else, public service was supposed to lead to the American dream where you purchase your home, and we're still behind the times of that. And this preference is really our way of doing some sort of reparations for the fact that we've let a group of public sector employees behind. So can you speak to what those average salaries are?
So yes, Councilwoman Sanchez, I can't speak directly to the hourly wages, but what I can say is that if you are a municipal 33 represented employee, your average take home after 2 weeks is $1,000, right? And that's high. That is if you are in a department like the water department with some overtime. $1,000 is our annual take home, and it has been for 20 plus years. So it's no secret that all of the city services are lacking people to come to work. We have people walking away from city jobs. And as a child, the city job, and I hate to take a bunch of your time, but let me tell y'all a story. I grew up in North Philadelphia. My mother was a single mother, and there was a trash man. His name was Mr. Pye. And when Mr. Pye would have a barbecue, it was in Mount Airy. And I always thought that I thought I was going to Germany or some exotic place. But we were simply taking a ride up Mount Airy because Mr. Pye kids went to Catholic school. They lived in Mount Airy. They had the best sneakers and clothes. And often, they would have bags of clothes for me and my sister from their kids. And that was everybody was like, man, if you got a city job, you have it made. That was why so many people gave up the everyday money for the pension, the security, things of that nature. Well, now we're left behind. District Council 33, we're not moving outside the city up to Mount Airy. We can't move the Northern Liberties. We can't move. I don't know where we're getting ready to go. This here is the best light I've seen shining since I took this job and since I've been a city employee. The average cost of a new home in Philadelphia is $300,000. None of our members can afford nowhere near $300,000, right? So, I hope I've said enough to answer your question, Councilwoman Sanchez, but we don't make no money. And the only way you make money is this. You stay there 24 hours, and if you're there 24 hours, who's raising your kids? You wonder why these streets is like this? Because you can't be at two places at one time. So if you're not raising them, somebody else will. The dope man will. The gun man will. That's who's raising our kids. And then we got to turn around and bury them too. That's what we do in the District Council 33. I tell anybody, I done paid more money and been to more of our members' funeral. I would ask any other employer in the city of Philadelphia, if you want to go eye for eye for funerals, I guarantee you I triple it. It's a shame to walk into a city morgue knowing you got to go in there with one of your members and identify a 13-year-old child shot dead for just simply playing basketball on the basketball court. So I know I'm getting off topic, and excuse me.
No,
but
all related.
When you have a safe home, a place for that child to go, the community is better. If everybody owning their home, they taking care of the community, and you know what? Then that kid got a neighbor next door that's going to tell his daddy when he's doing wrong. So housing is important. But if you just a drifter and just moving rental to rental, have no stability at home, you have no connection to the neighborhood. You know, you just waiting to move to your next stop.
So I will tell you, I agree with you. When I went from North Philly to Mount Airy via Tasco, when I saw all those trees, I was like, what is going on? Why don't we have more trees? Just trees, something as basic as trees, but we can go on. But thank you very much. I just wanted to go on the record that, you know, we have a housing action plan, and we talk about certain sectors and average salary of workers. And your workers are exactly the type of constituents that we're talking about, who will never make it to that home ownership unless we create some incentives. So I'm happy to be able to just to support this and know that we have to do more when it comes to the public sector workers in the city of Philadelphia. And we can go on and on around, you know, streets department, other, you know, I see these guys and I see these women now, a lot of women, a lot more women on those trucks, you know, lose their sense of taste and smell over 3 or 4 years, and their starting salary is below $40,000. That is shameful, and we got to do a better job at that. But thank you very much for working with Council President Clark and the rest of Council on this initiative, and we commit to doing much more for you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Sanchez. Chair recognizes Councilmember Gim.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and good afternoon. So thank you very much, President Garrett, because I the hook and that people are really excited just means so much to all of us. If there's one thing that we felt very clearly is that, as has been said before, municipal workers should come first. I mean, when we're doing many of these programs, we have to make sure that the people who are running the city, who are asked to live here as part of the city requirements, that they should be supported and that they should feel it. You know, it's one of the reasons why we want to make sure that municipal workers are first in line on the vaccines. You know, that if we believe the city is to run, we have to put our labor force to see the benefits of what the city offerings are. And there's no question that this one makes a huge difference. One of the things that I wanted to ask you a little bit about, though, because, you know, the money, you know, we obviously want this program to be expansive, and I think that it can be an enormous appeal for attracting, you know, a labor force, to retaining people, and all of that. But we do want to ask you a little bit, like, you know, we expect that there needs to be some counseling sessions so people understand the program, the things that they need. Do you feel like, you know, are there ways in which the city is going to be working with you, or you would like to see the city work with you better to get those counseling sessions up and running for your members so that they know how they qualify, how to troubleshoot any problems, documents that may be missing, that kind of thing?
Yes. You know, a good friend of mine taught me when you know better, you do better. And as soon as I left that press conference, one of the first things I told my immediate circle is, we need to set up and make sure that people are ready when this is at their doorstep, that they're ready. So, you know, we want all the information, but right now we have scheduled June 15th. June 15th, we will start meeting with our members to start looking at their credit and to identify who's ahead of who. And so when we don't want to waste applications, we want to find those that have some savings, that you know, have a somewhat stable credit history, and put them to the fore. There's only 1,000 houses allotted in this first wave.
Correct.
We trying to be ready. We have over 10,000 members. We trying to be ready for our members to say, you know what? I was there when the door opened. I'm qualified. I understand what's going on. And here go my paperwork and sign me up. Because this is huge. It's huge. And there are no other resources for city workers to be able to, just like Madam Chair said, an avenue to home ownership and to be able to start that generational wealth where you could say, you know, I grew up in this house. My mom left me this house, and I'm going to raise my kids in this house. Because just like people want to become, there's a group of individuals that enjoy being sanitation workers, that wear that as a badge of honor. Can you, Mr. Pye, that used to live on Mount Airy, retired from being a sanitation worker with his own home. So I want our members to be prepared to be able to say, you know what, because the way things are going, there ain't going to be no bad neighborhoods in Philadelphia. West Philadelphia is like New York City almost. I remember you could go down Kensington, it was like abandoned everything. Now it's sky rises and everything, I mean, I want my members to have an opportunity to do so. So absolutely, I think there should be a vetting process, and people should take that information, and those that want to do what's right to get into those homes should do so. And those that don't, sit on to the side.
Yeah. No, that's, one of the most important things that we've done over the last couple of years is really invest in new housing counselors and expand supports for people who are facing housing questions, challenges. They can be renters who are struggling with paying rent, or they can be homeowners with difficulty with credit. But, the housing counseling industry that City Council has really invested in has been people investing in each other. And, one of the things that, Madam Chair, I know you know this very well, but the city's best intentions have to match the outcome. That is our goal. So if this opportunity is available, we want to see as close to a 100% match between what we intended at the front end of that press conference to the actual end of having people walking into a place that they can then call home. But that journey is not something that just happens because a law gets passed. That journey happens because we actually collaborate very closely together. We help people out each and every step of the way. As you said, people get better at being better, so that they are able to handle some of the challenges, because the paperwork's immense. Credit issues are very real. We got to find supports. We've got to help people find what their financial resources are in order to get them into not only into the program, but to realize the maximum benefits of it. So I know, you'll have our commitment that we're going to see this through with perfect excision, and, a real partnership so that everybody feels supported.
Yeah, Bobby,
So that's all my questions, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Councilmember Gim. And just for the benefit of the viewing public, I want you to note that Councilmember Gim and President Garrett, they both raise a very important issue, but this is one area of Philadelphia where we should be proud. We have one of the most robust housing counseling agency networks, not just in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, but I'm talking about, you compare Philadelphia's housing counseling network to any of the major cities, and we have a robust one. And what we do need to do is make sure that we are connecting the services that those agencies provide directly to our city's workforce. So thank you for noting that for the record. The chair now recognizes Councilmember Green for questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, President Garrett, for being here. And actually, I was going to raise some points about the housing counseling agencies that, Councilmember Parker and I know very well from our work with Councilmember Tasco in addressing some of the issues of predatory lending. But what that also brings me to the question I want to raise for President Garrett, and you talked about getting your members prepared. And my concern is, when we have these great opportunities like Turn the Key and other type of opportunities, especially for the members of DC 33 and others around the city, my concern is, just like we saw with predatory lending, you have some of the unscrupulous people trying to take advantage of these opportunities by saying, hey, I can help get you into this house with this type of financing, these type of programs. So in addition to the work, President Garrett, you're doing to help prepare your members, I think it's also important that we provide additional resources. And I'm curious what you're hearing from your members, because I have a concern at times that some of the people who try to take advantage of people will try to take advantage of your members like they've done with others, especially during the predatory lending issues. And as I know, Councilman Catherine Gilmore Richardson has also talked about regarding Tango Title. So curious, what are some of the things you're hearing from your members regarding some of the concerns and opportunities for these type of resources?
Like I say, I haven't heard anything to that nature as of yet. Right now, it's just like, where do I sign up? Because just the thought of home ownership amongst our members is huge. And to be honest, some of them might say, use me if you can give me a key. You know what I mean? Because that's just where we are. That's just where we are. I mean, if I could write the book on how to, decipher who needs what. I know a guy, been a city worker for 23 years, and he lives in a room. And why he live in a room is because his daughter is a paraplegic from the neck down. So the money, he spend more money getting her back and forth to because she still goes to school. Like, all her facilities, her brain, she speaks normal. She's a normal teenager now. But I met her when she was maybe 7. But she's a teenager now. So everything she does just like any other teenager. She's just a paraplegic from the neck down. So that's expensive. Now, if I could say who deserves, he lives in a room, 2 rooms but they share bathrooms. He's a single father, right? If I could, I'd say that man deserves to be first in line, because I've seen what he does, and there are countless others. They taught me to not use the word, it was disrespectful to use the word, the R word.
Uh-huh.
But I learned that from dealing with members when I use that word, not understanding the meaning of it. But we have a lot of city workers that are in those situations that they spend majority of their check taking care of their handicapped loved ones, and they can't afford a house. They're not even thinking about it. So if I hear what you're saying, Councilman Green, about predatory lending, and I do think that there should be some safeguards in place to make sure that our people aren't used. But when you ask my people right now, that guy's name is Dave Lewis. He proudly take that house, and he wouldn't care what it costs to get there. You know what I mean? So that's just, I just wanted to lay that on you.
And I appreciate that comment. Having a son on the autism spectrum, I talk to a lot of city employees all the time who they only can have a certain amount of dollars, and there's a lot of estate planning and other planning they have to do to try and prepare for life after they may no longer be here, when they have a child that has a physical learning difference, like the gentleman we talked about. So that's why the whole package of services are important, like the estate planning and those other type of things. So I know your membership will do that to prepare your members for, okay, this is what it's like to own a home. Because I remember when I worked in the law department, and I used to represent Department of Housing and Community Development and was working with some of our housing council agencies, that transition from renter to homeowner was not easy for everybody. If you've always been in the family that rents, then when you own the home, we've had constituents who said, who do I call to fix something? And I was like, well, that's you, because you're now the homeowner. Because in their perspective, they've only had a chance to live in a home that was rented. So they always called a landlord, and that's what they always thought. So we had to provide that education, which is important too. We want to make sure that all of the people that have the opportunity will be able to maintain these homes in order to transfer them to their family. And that is how we create that type of generational wealth that we know is so needed in this city. So I know there'll be other opportunities and conversations to partner. I just want to make sure that all the resources of the city are available to help work with that, and also use this as a model for other city employees and how they can benefit from this opportunity, because that's the only way we're going to move beyond this 25% poverty rate that we have as a city. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Councilmember Green. Chair recognizes Councilmember Catherine Gilmore Richardson for comments.
Yes, greetings and good afternoon, and thank you so much, Madam Chair. Thank you to Council President Clark and to you, Madam Chairwoman Parker, for introducing this workforce housing legislation for the city of Philadelphia. I just wanted to thank President Garrett for his testimony and for the stories that he shared. I think it's important for us to hear the stories of the workers who are living day to day with these housing challenges and issues in the city of Philadelphia. And before I mentioned something relative to estate planning, which did come up at the press conference last week from one of the CDCs from Strawberry Mansion Brewery Town, I wanted to share with President Garrett that I too have family in DC 33. My brother-in-law is a member of DC 33. My sister is in 47. We were left 2 properties by my parents in their estate after they passed away. Both had mortgages on them, and we had to purchase those properties. And because of the income and debt to income ratios, my sister and brother-in-law were not able to purchase the house that we were left, and I had to do so in order to keep them housed. So this is something that I live every single day. And it's important for us to provide these opportunities to our city workers so that we can ensure they have stable, good quality housing in the city of Philadelphia, which we know is very expensive at this point. And so I am honored to support this legislation, to support the work of Council President and our Madam Majority Leader and all of the colleagues in the administration who have worked together with us on this legislation. I wanted to ask you, President Garrett, if you think it would be helpful as you all are working with preparing your members for this upcoming program, you said through the credit programs, if we also have information readily available around estate planning, because while we were left a property, we still had to pay a mortgage and take a mortgage out to save it. And so I wanted to ask you that question, if you think that that would be helpful as well.
Councilwoman Richard, absolutely. Anything that you guys, anyone that can hear my voice, can send to District Council 33 to help navigate this process, we are welcoming that information. Like I said earlier, when people know better, they do better. And we just want to give them the information. And I'm telling y'all, I'm fighting back my emotions right now because I know what it's like not to have. I know what it's like to have plastic on the windows. I know what it's like to move house to house, and when I took this job, I went from being nothing to being a good father, and I make enough money, I own my home. I got a mortgage, but I own my home. It's so many people just like me. Just like me. You think them women walking behind a trash truck is back there because they want to just be back there? They got families to take care of. Them women are doing whatever necessary to take care of their children. And to now have an opportunity to own a home, I got to get off this computer because y'all getting ready to rip my heart out, because I will leave this job knowing that something is better for city workers if they have an opportunity to home ownership, something that we've never, had something this close and grasp that if this come to fruition, man, you talking about 1,000 homes to start. If 500 of our members have that, that's 500 members that now have a piece of the American dream, what everybody strives for.
No, thank you, President Garrett. I feel the same way. lived that experience. And so it just warms my heart to be able to vote in favor of this legislation, and look forward to working with you all around estate planning as well, and anything else you think we should be doing around working with our city workers to help put them on a pathway to home ownership, and also to creating and building generational wealth. I wanted to, you noted, President Garrett, about the 65 plus members who have called DC 33 inquiring about this program. So, Angel, I wanted to ask you quickly if you all have received a number of calls about this program as well, and what more you think we need to do working in collaboration with you all to ensure that we are getting out the information, so that everyone knows what's happening, sort of as the process is taking shape.
Yes, we have gotten calls. Along with this, and the recent announcement about Philly First Home also came on board, so we are getting a lot of calls. As far as it relates to Turn the Key, our hope is that we're working towards having a specific database to make sure that we identify the municipal workers and those that have a priority, so that when developers get closer to their certificate of occupancy, they're going to be required to pull from that database to meet their requirements as per their development agreements. So we're setting up systems for that.
Okay, excellent. And you'll work with President Garrett and their team in collaboration around establishing that database as well.
Well, yeah, okay. We'll definitely be recruiting. We've also been working with a lot of other parties to make sure that it's representative of Philadelphia and the priorities set forth by council.
Okay, excellent. Okay, well, thank you. Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, President Garrett.
Thank you so very much, Councilmember Gilmore Richardson, and for all of your advocacy, and for moving from your personal experience with the Tangle titles to all of the work that you've done. It's been an honor watching you in action on the issue that I, as well as all members of council, care about a great deal. So we thank you for your leadership. President Garrett, let me just say thank you, and thank you, Angel Rodriguez, for your testimony. But President Garrett, I want to thank you for just putting on the record that example that you gave. Tell me the gentleman's name who became the sanitation worker and moved to Mount Airy. Just say it again. What was his name?
His name was Mr. Pied. I don't even know his real name.
Right.
But we always say, Mr. Pied was like the daddy we didn't know was part-time daddy, you know what I mean?
Right.
Show up at every barbecue and event, you know what I mean?
Right.
But back then, people do what they had to do, you know what I mean? And I love my mom because you know what? She didn't have to do it, but she kept that plastic on the window. She wasn't prideful to stand in that line and get the paper food stamps. You see what I'm saying? And you know what? She taught me respect, and she taught me get up and go to work. And guess what? I ain't never been to jail. I ain't never been locked up. And this city job, when I got out the Army, was waiting for me. And I'm so thankful for the opportunity. And that's why, I think that if more people like yourselves have real open, honest conversations with city workers, you will see that we want to be here, that we enjoy being city workers, and we want to live here and take care of these communities. There's a few bad apples, kick them out the bunch. You know what I mean? But there are more city workers that enjoy being public servants that like I say, my door is always open if you ever want to see them and hear from them one-on-one. And I thank all of you guys and Mr. Rodriguez for your efforts in trying to make home ownership possible for some municipal employees.
No, we thank you for sharing that, because there is a certain amount of dignity that goes into owning, certain amount of pride in ownership, and we just thank you for putting that on the record and defining what it means. I don't see any of my other colleagues in the queue. Does anyone else have any more questions for this panel? Hearing none, Rachel, will you please call the first panel we have to testify this afternoon on bill number 220261?
Yes, the only person we have to testify on that bill is Mike Zaccagni.
Thank you, Mr. Zaccagni. Okay, I can see you, Mr. Zaccagni. Good afternoon. Thank you so very much for your patience. I see you're connected. State your name for the record and feel free to proceed with your testimony.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Chair Parker and members of the Committee on Labor and Civil Service. I am Michael Zaccagni, Director of Human Resources for the City of Philadelphia, and I'm pleased to provide testimony on Bill number 220261. The Office of Human Resources supports the legislation to provide flexibility to recently discharged veterans and college students so that they may be considered for city employment. We believe this bill provides the necessary clarification and removes any questions as to their eligibility. Thank you for the opportunity to address council in support of this ordinance.
Thank you so. No, listen, I see you. Listen, we like that, Mr. Zaccagni. We like that. Thank you so very much for your testimony here today. I don't know if you were on when Council President Clark spoke at the opening of this meeting, but I thank him for putting on the record that we've been working on this issue of residency, and there has been lots of intergovernmental cooperation, conversations, and trying to reach a happy medium and much needed compromise in order to do a few things, but one in particular, and that is to ensure that the city of Philadelphia's workforce from a demographic perspective reflects the true demographics of our great city. And so the amendment that we have before us today will help us do just that. So we thank you for coming on and testifying. I want to ask any of my colleagues, does anyone have any questions or comments for Mr. Zaccagni, as he is the only member of this panel to testify on bill number 220261?
Yes, Council Chair Lady, if I can have one moment just for the record.
Sure, Chair recognizes Councilmember Sanchez.
Thank you, and I want to thank the Personnel Department. I know that in these discussions, there's been a lot of tension around what the intent of council is versus how sometimes things get operationalized and get lost in translation, as we say. I just want for the record, is there any other obstacles that you have foreseen that will limit our ability to do what is the intent of council, which is to have public servants live in Philadelphia and look like Philadelphia? Is there any other obstacle we should be aware of?
We always have challenges from the standpoint of recruitment, council member, and we're working hard to try to address those issues. During my testimony for our operating budget, I did mention that we did some reach out to the school districts. The recent hires that we had in our trades, entry-level trades classes, were very diverse, much more so than what you see in the general public. So we continue to work. As to the residency bill, I think we've talked about where that was. We were concerned, probably more so with the college students at the residency bill when we had our original discussions about this back last year. We don't see as many things happening with the military. This certainly will clarify that, so we won't see any issues around anyone from the military who's recently been discharged and for some reason has not reestablished residence, or college students who for some reason have not maintained their home address, their parents' address or their home address as an address of record. Most college students actually do that, but we do have some that do not, and I actually know some personally that have not done that.
There's some financial aid issues that come with that, right? If you're out of state and you want that in-state tuition, so we have to recognize that those, I say that as someone who still has someone in law school, and in-state tuition is a big difference than out-of-state, and so we appreciate that waiver. The other thing I just want to add to the record, we are unaware of any obstacles that the Personnel Department has created related to waivers in the Police Department. We have a recruitment challenge that is is across the country, and we recognize that, right? But I just also want to go to the record because I think in this conversation, there's been this notion that the personnel department has not been willing to do waivers, and that is not the case. We know that you have worked aggressively, as the council chair lady mentioned. Everybody was on the same page as this. So I want to thank you, because sometimes in these discussions, it appears that we're pointing fingers, and we're not pointing fingers, and the personnel office has been more than gracious in this process. So we thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I very much appreciate that, Councilwoman. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Council Member Sanchez. Council Member Sanchez is really interesting. Whenever we try to work together to get things done and get it done right, that never seems to make the paper. Right, Council Member? When we know what powers and authority the city of Philadelphia has already had, but any time that people can promote the appearance of conflict, it seems like that's what's sexier and makes the headlines. So I appreciate your acknowledging that for the record, Council Member. That's your institutional knowledge and your years of experience and service here. Thank you. Any further comments or questions from any of our colleagues for Mr. Zaccagni? Okay, there being no more questions, Rachel, will you please call the first panel we have to testify this afternoon on resolution number 220249? And once we get the panel and we make sure we can see everyone and we know that everyone is connected, I will then begin with some opening comments for this resolution before we hear the testimony.
Yes, the first panel is Ralph DiPietro, and then other individuals from the administration will be on hand to answer questions as needed.
Thank you so very much, Commissioner DiPietro. We appreciate your being on here. I just want to note for the record a few comments, and that is first, the construction industry is one of the industries with the highest rates of reported workplace injury and fatality. Furthermore, construction worker injuries and illnesses continue to be severely underreported. Now, when construction sites are not safe and work is not being performed to code, the public is at risk of property damage, physical injury, and death. And our Department of Licenses and Inspections, and you'll hear us throughout this hearing refer to it as L&I, is duty-bound to enforce the city's codes regarding the safe and lawful construction and use of buildings. Building and construction code inspectors are in essence responsible for conducting building inspections for all permitted activities and for patrolling construction activity to ensure that all projects are permitted and that safety precautions are being followed. For the benefit of the viewing public, I want to note for the record that recently I introduced what we refer to as the Philadelphia Neighborhood Safety and Community Policing Plan. And while the cornerstone of that plan is to make the case for more police officers to do community policing, we are also very intentional about the plan focusing on and speaking to the importance of quality of life issues and addressing those. And one such quality of life issue is the Department of L&I and Enforcement. Now, before the commissioner comes on, I want to note for the record that over the years, L&I has been given more and more responsibility while consistently facing flat funding. Its mission code, the mission of L&I, it states that it is to enforce the city's codes for the safe and lawful construction and use of buildings. But L&I's enforcement efforts have been expanded greatly beyond its mission statement. So for those who are watching at home, I want you to think about your responsibilities at work or at home, and then someone comes and puts more responsibility on your plate, but the resources and supports that you need to carry out those additional duties, no one ever gives you the resources that are needed. L&I needs additional funding so that it can, in essence, achieve its core mission. But also so that it can address the quality of life issues such as securing abandoned buildings and addressing nuisance businesses. And you've heard us talk about this quite often. Our councilwoman, member of this committee, Gilmore Richardson, when we've been traveling, talking about the smoke shops, L&I has a very significant role there. Listen, experienced construction inspectors are a scarce resource. Now, we have some systems in place, and we're going to hear from about those in a minute from our commissioner, but recruiting and training new inspectors, it can be lengthy and it's a challenging process. So with regards to construction specifically, the city of Philadelphia is not adequately investing in building and construction code enforcement or addressing the critical shortages in inspectors. The city of Philadelphia's failures, quite frankly, in the past have resulted in widespread violations of critical safety-related code by unscrupulous contractors, developers, and property owners. And I don't have to say it, people who seem to prioritize their bottom line over our neighborhoods and our residents. Some contractors and developers, and this is important for me to state for the record, this doesn't, what I'm about to mention, only happen in the construction industry. Because when I first learned that it was a thing, it wasn't because of the construction industry. It was because of the fact that I knew what the matriarchs and my family did for a living. And that's this issue of misclassification of employees as independent contractors so that you can circumvent not just the wages, but the health care, pensions, unemployment compensation, the taxes, and everything else you would be required to pay and or information you would be required to file that doesn't occur when contractors, developers, or employers seek to misclassify their workforce. So we do know, in fact, that there are contractors and developers who routinely do this thing of misclassifying their workforce. They ignore, in the construction industry, critical life safety code requirements. And what they're doing when they do that is they put the public and construction workers at risk without repercussions from the code officials who are tasked with keeping Philadelphians safe. So we are also intentional about when we scheduled this hearing. We are in the midst of Philadelphia's budget negotiations and hearings right now. We want to note for the record that unless and until we have a firm understanding of just how pervasive the lack of enforcement of construction code enforcement is, and how widespread this issue of worker misclassification is, guess what we won't? We won't know or have an accurate sense of just how many more L&I inspectors are needed to adequately address these issues. I hope that we can use this hearing today to do what I would call sort of getting a fuller sense of this problem so that we can develop potential solutions and also find a way. And I want the people of the city of Philadelphia to think about this. This is not just about how this worker misclassification and or payroll fraud impacts the construction industry or domestic workers like my grandmother and my Aunt Vi were. This is also about people defrauding our city of much needed tax revenue when we need every nickel and dime that we can get so that we can fund the very programs that you just heard us talk about, like making affordable housing more accessible or making our city safer and cleaner and one that has access to more economic opportunity for all. With that being said, Rachel, I'm going to ask that you make sure that our commissioner is connected. And if you are a commissioner, just state your name for the record and feel free to proceed with your testimony.
And I believe Councilwoman Sanchez, wants to make a comment.
Council Chair recognizes Councilmember Sanchez.
First, let me say amen to everything that you said. Having served 12 years as chair of the L&I committee, never quite understood the important role of public safety that the department plays until you're in the mix of it. I just wanted to put a couple of things on the record that I think are hugely important in the context of this conversation, right? And I feel obliged to do so as the only Latina elected official, but also someone with the immigrant community looks for guidance and support. And agreeing with you around the exploitation of workers, because ultimately the misclassification of workers is the exploitation of workers, because we're denying them the benefits and the protection that they should be afforded on the work site. But I do want to just add, in particularly in this context, and I was having a conversation this morning with the bricklayers around this underground economy, and I think there are many pathways we can get to a better place, and I appreciate your putting together this hearing to put it in a context so that we know what our next steps are. There is a large undocumented population. Let me repeat that. There is a large undocumented population that has no pathway to a social security number and therefore could never be properly classified in a work site unless it was through a 1099 vehicle. And I just want to make sure that as we talk about how do we do this, because let me tell you, these workers are not only great workers, they're in more danger than anyone else, because if they get hurt, they don't have health insurance. And the only health insurance they have is that emergency room, right? And very limited access to health care. And we want to make sure that we're protecting everyone, but that we also know that we have a second-class citizenship constituency and these workers who do this work every day. And look, I'm in South Kensington on every block. I see these workers every day. And when I talk to them, many of them would prefer to have some sort of pathway so they can legalize themselves, but they are scared. And any type of enforcement or mechanism that we put forward must have a message that we understand their particular constituency and their challenge with citizenship, which is not our responsibility here, but that of the federal government, but one where we've seen service worker unions work with us around creating pathways so that folks can come out of the shadows and earn their retirement and the benefits that we all share here as part of the American society. So I wanted to put that on the record, that I am absolutely agree with you, Madam Chair, on all of those, but there is a constituency that will continue to be exploited if we don't recognize it and put it out there as something that is unfinished and that we have to work through. And again, I want to highlight those worker unions who worked with us and created those pathways so these employees can come out and we stand to learn from them. When we talk about underground economy, we have a good friend, a mutual good friend, Mangu, who one time I made a comment about it and he called me and he said, "Council member, you are wrong. Let me tell you what's going on across the country." And I was like, I had to take a step back and say, "You're right, Mangu. We need to work through this." And in my conversation this morning with the bricklayers, I think there's a direct correlation with the work of L&I, with a direct correlation with how we audit these companies and how we empower the revenue department. And I would subscribe to you, Madam Chair, that the Eclipse program and the technology that we have, we can resolve some of these issues in front facing and getting people in the front end to tell us all these different trades, the amount of money that's supposed to be invested so that we can go after these bad actors, subcontractors who tend to be the ones that do this exploitation. So I just wanted to put that on the record, because sometimes in our advocacy work, and we're very passionate, we say different things and it's in a context. And in this context, in this conversation that I intend to be very engaged in, I want people to know where my priorities are and the fact that I'll be looking out for the hardest ones for us to take care of as part of this discussion. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so very much, Councilmember Sanchez. And I want to thank you for the record for putting all of that on the record. And the reason why is because you affirmed something that I and I know many others have witnessed as it relates to the men and women who are in essence being exploited, especially those who don't speak English as their primary language. And it is very frustrating, and I know we're going to hear a lot of this through testimony. Having had the opportunity to represent a constituency, particularly in the Alny community, which is zip code 19120. It is the most linguistically diverse zip code, not just in the city, but in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and particularly seeing immigrant Philadelphians because they are now a part of our community, the fabric of our community, exploited because English is not their primary language, and them not being able to understand that they should be getting paid prevailing wage, that they should have an employer paying into unemployment compensation for them, and some certain safeguards should be a part of their employment, and the owners, whether there's a primes or subs, because we've seen it both ways, Council Member Sanchez, who are very intentional about knowing what they're doing, in essence, who are stealing from the people of Philadelphia. So I agree with what you said, that we need to think about those who have often been referred to being relegated to second-class citizenship, and we need an intergovernmental response to deal with that, right? The federal government, the state government, and the city government, but that does not absolve we, the city of Philadelphia, from doing everything that we can to ensure that anyone who is benefiting from doing business with the city, they pay what they owe, because they're cheating all of us from doing what we need to do. So I thank you for giving us that context, Councilmember Sanchez. And Mungu Sanchez, he gives me the business as well, Councilwoman. So thank you so much. And Commissioner, we want you to feel free to state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Good afternoon, Chairperson Parker, members of the Committee on Labor and Civil Service. My name is Ralph DePietro, and I'm the Commissioner of the Department of Licenses and Inspection. Today I'm here to provide testimony on Resolution number 220249, which authorizes the Committee on Labor and Civil Service to examine the enforcement of building and construction codes, license and inspections inspector caseload, inspector staffing ratios, and the city's response to worker misclassification, also commonly known as payroll fraud. The mission of the Department of Licenses and Inspections is to enforce the city's code for the safe and lawful construction and use of buildings. An integral part of achieving that goal is ensuring the department is adequately staffed and that the employees of the department are provided with the required training and resources needed to effectively perform their work. Now, in an effort to increase the pool of potential building inspector candidates, LNI has established a partnership with Community College of Philadelphia. Work is already underway between LNI and Community College to incorporate technical code enforcement coursework into CCP's existing associate's degree. This partnership will promote the benefits of the code enforcement profession on an entirely new population of city residents that can now qualify for the LNI Building Inspector Civil Service Examination upon completion of the associate degree program. The department is also taking steps to increase the efficiency of inspectors by integrating technology into their daily tasks. Recently, we launched a mobile program that allows inspectors to log inspection results, capture and upload evidence, and queue up violations for issuance directly from the field. Until recently, inspectors were required to return to the office to input a lot of this information after inspection took place. Later on this year, the department will finalize the rollout of our Site Violation Notice program, an SVN. And basically, an SVN is a violation that's issued for less severe violations that can be corrected more immediately and on site. Issuing SVNs will reduce the number of re-inspections performed by inspectors and reduce the number of cases sent to court for enforcement. And all the inspectors will be provided with mobile printers allowing these violations to be issued directly from the field. In FY23, LNI plans to pilot a virtual inspection program to increase inspector efficiency and reach harder to access locations. The integrated solution will make audio, video, and notes from the virtual inspections available online to department staff within minutes after completion. Now, in recent years, the department has also made strides to crack down on contractors who misclassify their labor as independent contractors instead of employees in order to avoid government taxes, licensure, and training requirements. If you hold a city contractor license, the only people allowed to work on your job site are your wage employees or a licensed subcontractor's wage employees. When contractors comply with this requirement, we all benefit. Wage employees are much more likely to have the required OSHA training. Wage employees will be covered by the contractor's general liability insurance and workers' compensation policies, and the contractor is far more likely to pay all due city taxes. Our solution to address contractor business practices without hindering or conflicting with our core mission to conduct mandated building safety inspections was the creation of a separate unit called the Audits and Investigations Unit, or AIU. AIU is responsible for enforcing contractor compliance with various legally mandated business practices. Its inspection staff's duties include performing unannounced job site inspections, to verify that an OSHA 30 site safety manager is present when required. Every worker on site has an OSHA 10 card. Every worker on site is either employed by the named contractor or is a fully licensed subcontractor. That all required insurance is still current, and that employees requiring specialty certifications have the requisite certification. When unlicensed contractors are discovered, along with initiating the L&I sanctions and fines, AIU makes referrals to the Revenue Department to investigate companies for tax compliance. Working with his former colleagues in the Law Department, AIU Director Mr. Will Fernandez devised the new license violation program. And this program is calibrated to result in significant fines being issued to a bad actor contractor, while providing ample due process protections to those who are cited. And so far in fiscal year 22, AIU has performed 395 site inspections and issued $592,000 worth of fines to contractors and subcontractors. More than half of the $592,000 in fines cited resulted from subcontracting violations, and that is general contractors hiring unlicensed subcontractors or failing to adequately disclose subcontractor information. AIU's focus is on subcontracting audits and given L&I an unprecedented window into subcontracting practices in Philadelphia, and really helps to deter the use of unlicensed subcontractors, a major contributor to the underground economy. AIU intends to continue to increase its scrutiny on subcontracting practices. Since L&I's role does not include auditing financial records, we have developed a strategic partnership with the Revenue Department in the city's fight against misclassified workers. As required by the Philadelphia Code, we make referrals to the Revenue Department on a monthly basis. And thus far in fiscal year 22, AIU has made 67 referrals to the Revenue Department. I believe that we are making great progress and will continue to focus on making Philadelphia a safer city. And I thank you for hearing from the department today on this critical issue, and I'm prepared to answer any questions you may have.
Commissioner, thank you so very much for your testimony here today. And I want to note for the record as we begin our questioning that, Commissioner, in no way, shape, or form is this hearing an effort to not affirm that you, sir, and under your leadership, the hardworking men and women in L&I are not doing their best to do what they are bound to do as a department. Part of what I want to affirm here today, which is why I'm so happy you got on that record, the dollar amount. You quantifiably gave us a dollar amount of what that auditing unit and its 395 site inspections that it has issued $592,000 worth of fines to contractors, because that is a very good example for me that if we had adequate inspectors to be able to address this on a much broader scale, I would argue to you that the revenue that the city of Philadelphia would be in a position to attempt to recoup will help us to pay for the additional inspectors that we needed. So I wanted to just state that from the record. There are a few members of the building trades who were unable to testify today, but I want to make sure that we get some of their questions and concerns on the record. And we heard from more than one person about staffing issues at the department that went back to like 2008. And I don't know if this was just the decision of the city of Philadelphia and its administration or the Great Recession, but staffing issues and almost the reduction of staffing and a lack of enforcement, they've been building for over a decade. So I don't want Philadelphians to think that we just got here. I also heard from several folks that there is an anti-union bias within L&I. For example, I imagine that the unions could, quote unquote, be a good feeder for the program for L&I inspectors. And I'm also happy to hear you acknowledge that you're also working with CCP, because one of the questions that we've also had to address as it relates to union employees, and I've never heard a member of the building trades deny this issue, is that we need to work on diversity and inclusion within the building trades. So not only can unions be good feeders, but developing programs like the innovative program that you talked about with CCP will help us to continue to move forward in addressing those issues. Tell us, if you will, how does L&I view the complaints that come from unions as quote unquote nuisance referrals? Do you think that's the case? Or when you do get a complaint, does L&I immediately send an inspector out when the complaint has come from a union contractor? Tell us your response so we can get that on the record.
Sure. So typically we tell anyone making complaint, of course, to use the city's 311 system. It's really necessary in terms of documentation and making sure that we can track when we received it, who it was assigned to, and when they went out there. Typically, the union complaints tend to be a little bit more technical. Obviously, they come from a technical background, so there's usually good information in their complaint. It's a little bit above what you might get from like the average person without a construction background. Typically, their complaint may be, hey, there's no permits on file here or something like that. More typically, the union complaints that come from the various union sectors are more in depth than that. Every complaint is tracked and followed up on in accordance with our SLA, and that's really dependent on the severity, of the potential severity of the complaint, what's its impact to public safety. I do sometimes get emails directly from members of the various trade unions, and of course our response is always, please make sure to include it in the formal 311 complaint. For those that are AIU relating to our audits and investigation units, we have a separate email address where they can send a lot more information than you might otherwise be able to transmit through 311. We offer that too. So generally speaking, we take all complaints very seriously, and we follow up on them and ensure that they're actually properly documented for further action.
So, Commissioner, listen, I thank you for your response, because you brought up the issue of 311, and that is an issue that we have been getting questions and concerns or complaints about, and not just in this area, but just across the board, because there is a sense that funneling complaints directly through 311, that it isn't quick enough, that there are some issues that need a more sense of urgency. And so some folks will say, listen, Sherelle, because the response is not quick enough with 311, they've taken things in their own hands and have begun doing things like educating RCOs and neighborhood groups about a bad actor that is doing work in their particular area. And this is not just about individual homeowner protection, but about overall neighborhood protection too. I think we're going to hear from CLS today, and this was really interesting because people would traditionally think that the only folks we would hear from today are the building trades, but that is not the case. People have had their foundations messed up and not know what to do about it. And then they end up, if they don't have a private attorney or can't afford one, they end up being referred to community legal services, and they're going to testify about this. Or what I dealt with in the lower Northeast, they talked about dust being, out of control and everywhere, and who knows what is in this dust from an environmental perspective. And there's also this valid concern about shoddy construction happening in buildings, and then how it impacts those who have to work in those buildings. And so this includes the office workers, but again, this is not building trades. It also includes like the members of unions like SEIU 32BJ who do the cleaning and security for these buildings. Can you respond to any of these concerns, Commissioner, about, complaints not being addressed quick enough through 311 and no sense of urgency, and just not individual homeowner protection, but overall neighborhood protection too?
Absolutely. So first, to be clear, the issue isn't necessarily 311. It's not that they're sitting on complaints. I think what the general perception is, if the public doesn't see something, they assume that we've not been there, we've not investigated. I can say that some of these investigations, particularly the contractor ones, are extremely in-depth. There's a very high bar. Revoking a contractor license, suspending a license is a major step for government to take. These are very complex investigations. There's intense evidence gathering. They can run very long. In many cases, they can take months and months and months to complete. Sometimes I think very often folks assume, for example, as I said, they don't see the L&I inspector, so they assume that we've not answered their complaints. What I typically will refer folks to go to look at the department's website and look at 301. The interaction with 301 is fairly limited. We're going to tell them once we receive the complaint, once we've done something on it. But really, if you want that information, you go to the department's website, and that's where you'll see what we've done in terms of issuing cases and violations. It's also where you'll be able to find information on contractors whose licenses have been suspended. There's an entire sort of tab listing the dozens of contractors who've had a license suspension or revocation. And so I think the third sort of thing is a lot of that stuff requires a significant amount of interaction between the departments in the city. For example, dust, we rely very heavily on the health departments, air management folks there who have great expertise in terms of air management and the dust that might be coming from the site. So there's a lot of coordination that happens there, and I can say it does happen. But what often I think the result is, if people don't see a demonstrable action, they think nothing's been done. Very often, we write violations, and very often we find violations aren't warranted. But in any case, the department routinely responds to these complaints. On the construction side, we don't see an enormous amount of complaints. There's 700 to 800 a month. Sounds like a lot, but given that there's 40 plus inspectors, it's not that many. There's far more on our code enforcement side, the folks that do property maintenance and fire and business license inspection. So now we do have plans to do some reorganization around that to get complaints addressed more quickly. There's always room for improvement, even with the staff limitations that we currently have, and I think that'll go a long way towards addressing some of the public's concerns.
Thank you. And Commissioner, again, I just want to note for the record, because of not just the volume of complaints, but you yourself just advised us that there's a certain level of complexity in these cases and investigating them, and a certain skill set and knowledge of and training that's required for an inspector to even know what to look for when they are going to do their jobs. And so it just affirms for us your response just now that not only are more inspectors needed in this particular area, but the professional development that you talked about for them during even our budget hearings is something that we need to prioritize and we need to fund as well. Two more questions that I need to get on the record, Commissioner, then I'm going to move on because my colleagues have questions. The next one, I'm not going to name the street, but I know this one because they called me and we called you all. This is an apartment building, and this was a case and an example for us that we didn't know what to do. They called me. I'm chair of City Council's Committee on Labor and Civil Service, so it's quite customary for me to get these kind of complaints, even if they're not in the district that I represent. In this one, an apartment building, and we're going to say it was on B Street, but this was in the Fishtown area. We got a call saying, and this was extremely important to me, and if Councilmember Green is still on, he will know that we learned about the importance of water laterals, and it is why this Councilmember Brian O'Neill, Green, and several others worked so hard to get the American Water Resources Plan for Philadelphians to have access to insurance coverage, because the water laterals, and that connection from the street to our house, they will tell you the second if something happened, it is the responsibility of the homeowner. So that became a solution to it. So with that being said, when we get the call telling us that inferior products as it relates to water laterals are being installed. Now listen, Commissioner, I want you to know I can only take this from what's been reported to me because I don't know anything about this industry. I'm not a technical expert. But when they described to me that this inferior product was something called a saddle, and it it technically, they said, doesn't have the lifespan of something that is usually used, and they referred to it as a T. So that was one. And this was in the area of plumbing. I was then alerted that we have the Plumbers Advisory Board, and they ruled in this case, this apartment complex being developed, that those saddles, what they refer to as inferior products, that they had to be replaced with the T. The next thing we know, we heard that L&I had reversed the advisory board's decision. Then they said, well, Sherelle, we don't know what you all can do now because there's a class action suit. And there were some valid concerns about these saddles. And that, one, they are not built to last. Now, we just got finished jumping up and down and really excited about a bill to build in a program we just established, putting Philadelphians into 1,000 new affordable houses in the city of Philadelphia. But if we're going to put people in those houses and they're being built using an inferior product like the saddle, as it was communicated to me, and in 5 or 6, they're happy now, but in the 5th or 6th year, they're going to have this major weight of this problem. That's going to be a challenge for me. Help me with what I just described, and Commissioner, say it in a way that the average Philadelphian who's watching, that they can follow us and understand what we're saying.
I'll do my best. So I believe I'm aware of the particular incident you raised, and really the issue there was saddles were being installed. There was some confusion between the department and Local 692. This was typically, this was more concern, the original concern was raised about sprinkler water service, but there was also domestic water service. And so what had happened is the department made a decision initially to accept the saddles as code compliant. After review of the documentation, after review of the NFPA standards, and so they were permitted. Then at some point, the board of the Plumbing Advisory Board rendered a separate opinion recommending that in their interpretation that the saddles were not code compliant, therefore the installation should be stopped, and ultimately it was. So the saddle is really the connection between the water main, water coming in, both domestic and suppression water, and the piping that runs to the property. So this is exactly what I meant by how the complaints that typically will come from trade unions and folks like that are much more technical than they might from the general public. Most folks won't understand what the saddle is, or even know one was installed in violation of the code.
Commissioner, tell me this, again, a saddle versus a T. Is it true that one has a lifespan that's only about 5 to 6 years, and people, the average citizen who doesn't know the difference between a saddle, or a T, or is there any technical, guidance or advice that we know about that a saddle, again, doesn't have a life that's as long as a T? Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, anything that's a saddle type connection, meaning it sort of fits over a pipe and very often looks like a clamp, any of that are probably going to have a reduced lifespan. The real issue is whether or not it's permitted as a matter of right by the codes. And the concern. Now, remember, when it comes to piping outside the building line, the water department has jurisdiction there. So it's very often we'll put great stock into what their evaluation is. Not to suggest that there isn't some truth to that. I don't know. I mean, typically speaking, saddles are not as good as a connection as a T might otherwise be.
So, the Commissioner, thank you for, again, acknowledging that for the record, for lay people like me who don't do this for a living. But I want the council members to think about someone who is just moving into a house and this type of, product is being used, and it has a shorter lifespan. And I don't know what a saddle is or a T is, but if I am a homeowner, that is something that would be extremely important to me, so that I can know that it's something I need to pay attention to. Thank you for that. The last question I want to get on the record, and this one bothered me. I am not going to name this hotel, but to say that this was one that we received, Commissioner, and this was in Center City. This was a concern about non-trained and unlicensed people doing the work at a mainstream hotel Council, you heard Councilmember Sanchez mention this early on, and it takes me back to my first picket line when I was a staffer for Councilmember Tasco. It was in the Logan, what we refer to as the Logan Sinking Homes area, and we were doing demolition, and the firm that won the contract had committed to using residents in one of our local unions that was largely black and brown, that was Laborers Local 332, and also residents who lived in the Logan community. And when it came time to do the work, Commissioner, everything that they had reported to the RFP review panel, none of it came true. They didn't hire residents from the neighborhood to give them a chance to gain some experience, nor did they hire members from Local 332. Instead, what they did, and I was there at 3 o'clock in the morning waiting for these folks to come in, they were taking advantage of the undocumented workers that you heard Councilmember Sanchez mention earlier, who were from out of state, who did not speak English as their first language. And this hotel in particular, and we've got, when I say documents, I'm talking about, copies of wire transfers, photos. This hotel was housing people on the 6th floor that were brought in from out of state. I was told, L&I was told that these developers were coming for what we call a spot inspection. So I said, wait a minute. I said, what do you mean L&I told developers that they were coming for a spot inspection? That's like me being a teacher and I'm getting an evaluation. The superintendent or some other advisors coming to watch me in the class to teach. They don't tell me in advance that they're coming to observe me. That's what the spot inspection is about. So I need you to help me with that one. Is that something L&I would ever do? Tell a developer when they were going to do a spot inspection. And then next, they said, well, not only did they give them a heads up, they said L&I never actually investigated. What they said was that the case was concluded. What does that mean when it says a case is concluded? The workers, and we had some workers who were from our region who got hired because they were actually really licensed in their industry. They got COVID while they were on site, and there were also legitimate concerns that the workers were paid with cash. Nothing went to the city in terms of wage taxes. Sherelle, how do you know? Because when these workers reported it to me as chair of City Council's Committee on Labor and Civil Service, they showed me copies of the wire transfers, and I won't name the firm, but it was, I know it wasn't real and they didn't make it up because I saw that with my own eyes. And so when I did the math for these workers, let's think about 30 workers at $100 per week lost in terms of wage taxes for a year, 52 weeks. That's about $156,000 lost in terms of wage taxes. And Commish, that's from this one site where this hotel, and they were functioning in the midst of COVID. Did I ever go down personally to follow up on what they were saying? No, because if I would have walked down there, I wouldn't have known what to look for if I saw it. So can you address the questions and concerns? And you probably even know the specific case that I'm referring to now and what was there, so we can get that information on the record.
So with regard to agreements to sort of hire community, folks in the community, that's something certainly outside of what L&I would regulate. We typically don't have any awareness of that, whether that's a private contract between the company and anyone else. With regard to the specific property, I'm very aware of it. We did a very lengthy investigation, and unfortunately, sometimes you can't look at people and tell if they're licensed just by looking. So we actually did go. We went there a number of times. I went myself, in fact, to meet with the management there. And what we found that everyone there was licensed. We had a plumbing contractor in particular. So what happens is very often in big companies like this, they contract with a company who flies around the country doing all of their installations. It's how come they all look very, very similar. I guess that's desirable to some extent. But we did an absolute thorough investigation. We in particular we reviewed payroll records of the plumber to ensure the folks that we saw on site were actually licensed. We did several site checks to make sure that they were following. At the time, it was the very beginning of the COVID outbreak, so we were making sure that they had the proper certifications and the proper taking the proper measures. That the reason they brought the folks in early from out of state was so that they could quarantine in place. So we did a lot of investigations. We spent a lot of time in that particular project to make sure that they were following rules. Now, that much of this was in response to complaints, but also, there's two ways to get to a site. There's complaints that you typically do. They're not really announced. No one knows if someone's made a complaint. Pre-scheduled inspections very much are announced. Not only are they announced, typically the permit holder calls to arrange them. So they know when we're coming to do a plumbing final inspection, for example, or a framing inspection.
So Commish, I want you to stop right there and say that. You're saying if it's a pre-scheduled, what did you reference it as?
So there's the permits certain permits require inspections, and those inspections, footing, foundation, final, framing inspections, those are arranged by the permit holder, so they absolutely know when we're coming. Now, complaint inspections, they're anybody's guess. They don't know when we're going. And typically, audit and investigation visits are unscheduled. Whether they're complaint or as part of their programming. Now, at some point, their initial investigation may be unscheduled, but at some point they may arrange to meet someone on site because they need to exchange paperwork and look at records or whatever it may be. But we do, and in particular in this place, we did several unannounced inspections. I'm very familiar with what happened here. We did several unannounced inspections as part of our whole sort of enforcement scheme there.
Commissioner, the final question for me, and then I'm going to move to my colleague, Councilmember Quinones Sanchez, for questions. Commissioner, tell me, have we ever because this is an economic crime. I want to now, the technical part, I'm going to move away from that, and I want to go back to the last sort of summary I gave about if we had 30 workers at $100 per week that was lost in terms of wage taxes, that's about $156,000 lost in terms of wage taxes, and that's just from one construction site. Is there, and here, this is where I am because I'm always thinking about intergovernmental cooperation and planning. Because this is an economic crime, is there ever a time when the district attorney's office, the city's office of labor, licenses and inspections, revenue, do we come together in a very formal way to address any of these concerns regarding misclassification of employees and or tax fraud or payroll fraud? And again, I'm not just talking about just from the construction industry, but construction, it could be service workers, it could be domestic workers. Is there ever a formal process where all of you get together and are at the table, like the nuisance establishment task force, right? Where everybody is together. Commissioner, do you all do that as it relates to this area?
I don't believe there's an actual sort of task force that combines all those representative agencies. I know that our Audits and Investigations Unit has regular meetings with Revenue. We make referrals. I think I mentioned in my opening remarks, we've made 60-some referrals this year. So we're typically dealing with construction. We're not so much service workers, that sort of thing is really not what I like because we don't regulate that. So this is all contractors and subcontractors. We make the referral to the Revenue Department, and they of course do what they do. Now, much of that is tax information, which is not something that Ellen and I can regularly obtain, or quite frankly even decipher. It's clearly outside of our expertise. So there's no overall sort of task force where these groups participate, although I do know we work pretty regularly with Revenue and at times with the Mayor's Office of Labor. I'm not convinced that we've made any referrals to the DA. I'm not sure that would come from L&I. We have made referrals to the DA for behavior, things that contractors did on the site, whether they were their actions were dangerous or in terms of risking public safety. So we have done that, but we don't typically do that in terms of the revenue end.
Commissioner, thank you so much for answering those questions to the best of your ability. I want to make sure I put this on a record that I know the Mayor's Office of Labor because I've spoken with Deputy Mayor Laser and relative to payroll fraud, tax fraud, misclassification of employees as independent contractors. He did tell me there was some communication between his office and I believe it was revenue, but I am a firm believer that we need to make sure that we have every Philadelphia departmental entity that would be a part of investigating in any way, shape, or form whether or not there is a company taking advantage of our city by not paying the appropriate taxes. We need to adjust, have everyone at the table because, again, we are in a position right now with all of the challenges facing our city that we can't afford to leave $1 on the table. So thank you, Commissioner. The chair recognizes Councilmember Sanchez.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and for putting up what I was going to speak to a little bit, and I wanted to ask the question of our Commissioner of L&I, and I totally agree with you and want to just say absolutely need to have a task force, some sort of work group. The Commissioner knows I sent him a note this morning after I met with the bricklayer folks and said I need to sit around the table and figure out how we're going to work this. But let me ask the technical question, because ultimately it is about interdepartmental cooperation, right? And L&I is charged with public safety and revenue is charged with collections. Can you speak to what could we do in the eclipse? The front-facing, when someone comes in and gets a permit, a construction permit, they attest, right? They submit for a permit and they attest that there's a certain amount of money, right? Our building permits are based on the amount of the construction job. What limitations, if we have any, do we have with making them break that down by sector for the purposes of then following up for potential audits?
I'm not quite sure I understand what you mean by sector. What's possible with... I'm sorry, go ahead.
No. So if I'm a general contractor, I'm doing a $10 million project. I get a permit for $10 million, but I know $2 million of it is brick, $3 million of it is plumbing. So that we know, because again, there's a GC problem and then there's a subcontractor problem. But if we break it down, then we can better align the revenues role.
Yeah, so thank you for that clarification. So basically what it sounds like you're referring to is our subcontractor upload process, where once a permit's issued, very often, the person that makes the building permit may not have awarded all the subcontract work out. For example, it may not have hired the plumber yet, right? So what we do is we require them to upload all these subcontractors into Eclipse. It sounds like what you're suggesting maybe is a step beyond that in terms of something that we could then send to the revenue department. I don't know what that would look like. Yep. I don't know what that would look like. Certainly, if it's an upload of a piece of information, that's one thing. One thing I should probably say when it comes to this sort of worker misclassification. Remember, for the average L&I inspector, they're just seeing one of two things: either you're a licensed contractor and you're an employee of that contractor, or your own separate licensed contractor. And we can check that all day long and do. That doesn't get to the point, I think, of what your concerns are here, which is
right. But the eclipse is the first time we have technology that we can use in a more proactive way, right? So we have the ability for them to upload a subcontractor information to prove all those points, right? You have no interest in the value other than the general big number value. But as the subs, as they are uploading and they say, my point of the 10 million is 1.2 million. And the reason that becomes important is because when this goes to the revenue office, they need to know what tax returns those subs are filing. So if they just got a $1.2 million job and their quarterly says they only did $100,000, we know who to audit, right? We know there's a problem because ultimately the bad actors are not going to get caught until we hurt them in their pocket because they don't care about public safety. They don't care about worker safety, right? The bad actors, they care about their bottom line. So I'm saying you can submit this later for the chair as part of this conversation is what opportunities does Eclipse offer us? And can we add those additional data sets that then allow us then to bring this over to the revenue department in a way that then we can forecast what are the type of auditing mechanisms that we would need that align with information you already have as it relates to this underground economy, because this issue is not going to go away. I think, everybody's impacted by it, and we want to come out of here with some sort of solutions or some matrix about what we're going to do about it. And that's staffing for you, and that's staffing for the revenue department.
Yep. I think maybe we can have a conversation with revenue and see what we can collect on that front end that might streamline their investigations on the back end. Yep, absolutely.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As I said, I'm very much interested in this topic and working with the L&I Commissioner. I agree with you. I think this is something that we have to pull some toolboxes together, and then people sit around the table and figure out how we best do this. This is a public safety matter for all of us, and it's about the workers. But it also is a revenue issue. And the only thing that gets people in bad behaviors is when we hit them in their pockets. And I think this is one of the ways we can get them. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Council Member Sanchez. And, again, we concur on this issue. And unless everyone is together at the table at the same time. In addition to that, Commissioner, and for the benefit of the viewing public, it's very important that we get this on the record. And I can't say this definitively. The only thing I can say, and again, remember, I'm not a technician, Commissioner, but when we get calls from constituents that work, Sherelle, they're in this house next door. It's being converted to a duplex or a triplex. It's a single family dwelling, and they, Sherelle, they always work. Every time I lay my head down at 10 o'clock, it's like they come and then they're working all through the night. Commissioner, while I do not give people this formal advice, I tell them this definitely gives you just cause to make sure you continue to call me and my office along with 311, because if there is a licensed contractor in the city of Philadelphia, it is highly likely that they are not running loud equipment and or attempting to do work overnight. These are usually unlicensed contractors who are engaged in this very activity, misclassifying employees, payroll fraud, tax fraud, to be quite frank, because licensed contractors, this is not normally their standard operating procedure to work in the middle of the night. And if you were to ever get a person to talk to you on the record about it, Commish, some of them will tell you, the unlicensed ones, if you know of anyone whose homes they've worked on, they'll tell you they do the work overnight because we don't have enough inspector staff to go work on that overnight shift to catch them while they're in action. What's your response to Philadelphians that are experiencing that right now?
Yeah, that's something that we heard a lot during the the budget hearings. We typically, it's true at this point, we don't have sufficient staff to have a second shift. We do have inspectors that work 24/7. We have emergency response inspectors. We have nuisance inspectors. But typically following up on complaints of like construction after hours, we don't. Now, more than in the days when construction wasn't booming so much in the city, it's a little bit easier to address those. But more often than not, what we're looking at is the work that was done, not the people that did it. They're long gone, and the homeowner is left with that. And in very many cases, they're left with a substandard project and the need to get permits and that. So up front, education is key to folks that are thinking about working on their home or going to get work on their home. That is so important. We put a ton of information on the website, a ton of handouts and videos about permitting, about contractors. But certainly the ability to respond after hours is something that we hear loud and clear.
Thank you so very much, Commissioner, for your response. The chair now recognizes Councilmember Catherine Gilmore Richardson for a question.
Greetings and good afternoon, and thank you so much, Madam Chair, for this hearing and for your resolution regarding this really important public safety quality of life and revenue issue for the city of Philadelphia. You have already put on the record a number of the questions that I had, so I thank you for your robust preparation for this hearing and for all the work that you're going to continue to do on this matter. I wanted to ask L&I Commissioner a very quick question because I heard you talk about, Commissioner, the new mobile inspection reporting mechanisms and the other mechanism called SBN. But I wanted to know if L&I is looking into additional new technology around enforcement, potentially the use of drones and that sort of thing.
So we are looking at a couple different things in terms of, I mentioned the remote inspection pilot. I think that's pretty cutting edge in terms of what we would do as a department. Now, again, we didn't invent that. It does exist. There are other agencies out in the country that are piloting this or actually have it as a full-blown program. One of the things, though, that this does suggest is you can see that the job of an L&I inspector has gotten very, very complicated over the past few years. You can imagine using our mobile tools as user-friendly as it actually is, and as much time as we spent making sure we made this so that it was a benefit to the inspectors. It does require some technical competency. So not only do they have to come to us with some ability to read at a very high level, to process information at a very high level, codes are not written in language that the ordinary folks understand, quite honestly. Not only do they have to do that, but they have to also be able to utilize our technology. And in fact, we're seeing this as a bigger and bigger challenge. And I think as the chairperson mentioned about our partnership with community college, that's one of the things we're really hoping will sort of shorten that curve time, because it is very difficult to get folks in that are ready to do the job and have a good basic understanding of how technology works.
Okay, so I'm happy to hear that will be a part of your not only strategy moving forward, but the thought process around recruitment and how we ensure we are training our L&I commissioners moving forward. I also wanted to ask an additional question relative to how you all, licenses and inspections, are looking at this whole issue around the misclassification of workers as a whole. And if you all can give us, if possible, some type of ballpark figure of the amount of revenue you think we could potentially be missing out on as a municipality. Is there any way for you all to track that?
That would be really very difficult. I think if I were to give a number, it would be irresponsible, because I really have no idea, what we're talking about. Much of this is tax related, and I think that that's probably something we would. There's certainly experts, industry experts, and folks in revenue could probably give a much more accurate answer. I'm sure it's sizable, it's considerable. There's a lot of things at work here. For many of these small businesses, I think, again, Chairperson mentioned it's companies that engage in this behavior are typically those that are not licensed. So you can imagine they're the most difficult to track. They're the most difficult to investigate. In some ways, if you're fully licensed, it's a lot easier to take action against you, to take enforcement action, because you've got a lot to lose. So there's a lot to this. I'm sure the number is pretty significant. It would be a complete guess on my part to even say what that looks like.
Okay. Now,
Councilmember Gilmore Richardson, Councilmember Gilmore Richardson, your sound sounds a little foggy. Can you say something?
Yes, Madam Chair, can you hear me?
You are a little
Madam
bit better.
Chair.
Councilmember Gilmore Richardson.
Madam Chair.
We can hear you now. Let's see if you can get through this with us hearing the complete sentence.
Okay, I apologize for those internet connection issues, but I wanted to know if L&I has ever done a report around the return on investment or potential study, really comparing Philadelphia to other municipalities and how they run their licenses and inspection units, looking at staffing levels, the ability to do proper code enforcement, construction enforcement. Have you ever done that type of report and really looking at us and comparing us, whether it may be apples to apples or apples to oranges, but giving us a fuller picture of where we stand against other municipalities with the way we operate?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what I think you're going to see is that we've looked at this in a number of different ways, and in fact, L&I in Philadelphia is an accredited building department. We're the largest accredited department in the country, one of the first, in fact. And part of that accreditation process is to make sure that all your various processes and protocols are properly vetted, that you have quality control measures in place. So, I mean, that speaks a lot to the department's code enforcement, or more particularly our building construction code enforcement. What I think you find, and what we've seen routinely in other departments, is there's not many departments in the country that are like L&I, meaning they have this very giant mandate where they do building safety, construction safety, fire safety, license issues, zoning requirements, and all the other sort of things that may not immediately come to mind as public safety, but are absolutely they're ordinances. The paper bag, plastic bag ordinance is an example. And so I think what you're seeing is that the department is so wide that there's really no apple to apple comparison. In fact, when you compare us against the building department, as I said, you would find, and this has been my experience in talking to folks in the industry outside of Philadelphia, L&I in Philadelphia has a tremendous reputation. People understand that we're really out front there in terms of what we do. In fact, it's a testament to the fact that people leave this department and run major building departments in other parts of the country. And that's wholly because of what they've learned here and what they've seen here. So the confusion and the difficulty you get is comparing L&I to something that's similar to L&I, and there really just isn't. In fact, most places, L&I is probably made up of 3 or 4 different departments. And to complicate matters even further, this is one of the reasons why I believe we're losing some of our inspectors. You know, they'll take their certifications, they'll take what they've learned, and they'll move to another department or another agency. And all they'll be responsible is construction site inspections. They're not asked to look at licenses. They're not checking to see if there's tax compliance. They're simply going out there and doing framing inspections. And in many cases, the third-party agencies that are securing them are doing so and able to pay them more, provide company vehicles. So it's a very complex question. There's a lot of stuff going on here. I'd absolutely love to talk about this in greater detail. I don't want to hijack the entire hearing just for this, but it's something that we've looked at in a number of different ways for very many years.
No, but thank you for that response, Commissioner, because I think it really underscores the need for us to take a deeper dive and look at the structure of our L&I department to ensure that we can adequately respond to what really an uptick in development and construction.
Councilmember Gilmore Richardson, again, the internet is going in and out. If the council member has any follow-up questions and or comments, Councilmember Gilmore Richardson, we will get those to the stenographer so that we can make sure that they are added to the public record. But we are no longer able to hear you. Commissioner, I want to thank Councilmember Gilmore Richardson for getting that issue regarding our workforce, its preparation, and thank you for responding, because you sound a little bit like the police department in the issue that just came up. We were talking about police officers who come to Philadelphia, get through the Philadelphia Police Academy. They're here for maybe just a few months, and once they've been here, they are immediately sought after, and they might leave and go to a county in the 5-county area. And why were they heavily recruited? They were heavily recruited because Philadelphia is well known for our training, and they want those who have come through our academy. So I heard you when you talked about the uniqueness of our department. Rachel and I in my office, we would talk about this, and we would call it mission. A little bit of mission creep is also in there, Commissioner, because in some cities, some of the responsibilities that L&I has, some departments of licenses and inspections in other cities, the Department of Licenses and Inspections is not responsible for them, thus making your core mission, of safety, construction management, that sort of thing, making sure that we have more than enough adequate staffing. I don't have the number in front of me, but in prep for the hearing, I was having a conversation with someone who just told me about the number of inspectors in Pittsburgh. I don't remember the number off the top of my head relative relative to code enforcement, construction, oversight. And when they told me what that number was, and then we were talking about Philadelphia's number, I just said, wait a minute now, this doesn't make sense. Well, how could Pittsburgh have this large, number of inspectors in this department, and we're quadrupled, the size in terms of the caseload that our inspectors are dealing with. What's the caseload ratio for our inspectors, by the way, particularly as it relates to construction?
So there's really a couple different numbers. For many years, we looked solely at permit load, how many permits an inspector carries. And we found, for a variety of reasons, that really wasn't the best metric. The real one you want to know is how many job sites are they going to, how many inspections on a given day. We know that we get somewhere around 200 or so requests, 280 requests for inspection a day. Inspectors, typically, the construction inspectors, strictly construction inspectors, there's about 40 of them at any given day. They're able to handle those requests fairly straightforward. That's about 5.5, 6 inspections per inspector per day. If you couple that with the complaints, there's another 4 or 5 complaints in a given week for the same inspectors. So that's the real caseload is their demand, their daily demand. Now, right now, we have enough to meet the current demand. We have enough to respond and maybe even make some improvements on our complaint response. What we don't really have is enough to grow into these other areas that we typically don't do with regard to construction inspection. Audits and investigations unit is a smaller unit. We're looking to staff that up. They'll take over time a much larger share of that kind of investigative work over. They've gotten very, very good at it. I only see them getting better at it. Given the fact that we've got we've got a class of construction trainees in place now, with another to come by the end of the year, those resources will be available at AIU, and I think you'll see some more really startlingly good work out of that unit.
Commissioner, the last question I'm going to ask you to answer for me. This is the last one, Commissioner. I said that about 5 questions ago, didn't I? This is really the last one. You were talking about remote inspection, having the technical capacity to do remote inspection for the benefit of the viewing public and folks like me who are not the most technically advanced in skill. Give us just a quick overview of what that could potentially look like, Commissioner.
So what we want to do with this is we want to be able to send a link. So right now we're looking at the pilot. We're looking at doing mostly construction. So what we're going to be able to do is if a company wants the framing inspection today, they would schedule it. They'd get on the schedule. Right before their inspection, they would get a link. And through that link, they'd be able to sort of visually show the inspector the space, what they're there to look at. I mean, it's an overly simplistic sort of summary of it, but that's basically how it works in most places. And the benefits from that is an inspector can do multiple inspections from one single location. They're not driving all around the city. They're not looking for parking. Remember, L&I inspectors presently use their own vehicles, so it's not exactly easy. They have the same constraints getting around that the average citizen does. They got to find legal parking. They got to look for meters, that sort of thing. This allows us to really maximize some efficiency. It allows us to more thoroughly document because we're able to take photos and videos right then and there. And I think it'll provide a benefit to the contractors, the legitimate ones anyway, because time is money to them, and they want to be able to get these inspections done and over with so they can continue on with their projects. And a corollary to that is it also allows us to have the field inspectors spend more time on the folks that are behaving badly and causing angst across the city. That's where we need to put the resources.
Commissioner, thank you so very much for your patience today. I do need to ask for the record, are there any further questions or comments from members of the committee for our commissioner? Hearing none. Commissioner, again, thank you so very much for your time. We're going to stay laser focused on this issue throughout the budget hearings. And I know that you've heard when you testified before council and you heard the line of questioning from all of my colleagues. L&I is a priority for all members of council. So goes the effectiveness and efficiency of our Department of Licenses and Inspections. So goes many neighborhoods. So goes our public safety and city that's growing and building at the rate that the city of Philadelphia is right now. We have to continue to make the safety of our neighborhoods and our residents a number one priority. So I look forward to working with you in the future. With that being said, Rachel, will you please call the second panel? We have to testify this afternoon on resolution number 220249.
Yes. I know we have Todd Farrelly, Brian Myers, and Brian Edis ready to testify.
What we should do is just proceed with these three, and if the other person comes back, we will you can just add them on in the end. But right now, in the order that I have on my agenda, I have Todd, I have Brian Myers, and then Brian Edison. If anyone else comes in to speak on this panel, Rachel, we will add them after that. With that being said, Todd, are you okay? Todd, I can see you. You are connected. Todd, just state your name for the record and feel free to proceed with your testimony. And thank you for being with us today.
Sure. My name is Todd Farrelly. I'm the political director for Sheet Metal Workers Local 19. I just want to start by saying good afternoon. I want to thank Chair Parker and the rest of the committee for allowing me time to speak today on this matter. As I said before, my name is Todd Farrelly, and I'm the political director for Sheet Metal Workers Local 19, which represent over 4,300 skilled and licensed workers throughout Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware. We provide the highest quality craftspeople for residential, commercial, and industrial sheet metal industry. Our members are highly trained professionals with the knowledge and skills to provide top quality craftsmanship. When workers join our ranks, they're receiving fair pay, great health and retirement benefits with the best safety and skill training in the industry. Many of the trades, Local 19 included, have engaged with licenses and inspections over the years on serious infractions and violations to find that reports have either fallen through the cracks or not investigated fully. That isn't to say that we do not understand that L&I has been seriously hamstringed for years with staffing levels which are well under where they should be for a city of the first class. To put into perspective, currently New York City has roughly 900 inspectors on staff, and Philadelphia is roughly about a third of the size of New York City. So this would lead one to postulate that Philadelphia should have staffing levels of around 300 inspectors. I believe the current level of inspectors is around 72, but some estimates have come in around in the 50s, and the commissioner just said, their construction unit is around 40. So, for the size and scope of the city, it's obviously, a lot less than what we need as a city. And, these lack of inspectors working for L&I, it can create an unsafe work environment for people who live and work within the city. The more inspectors, that are present, the more workload that can be picked up, and that would protect more people and bring, back more funding for the city. We, as well as other labor organizations, also understand that much of the understaffing could be attributed to budgetary shortfalls and added workload pushed upon the department, as mentioned prior. The sentiment is that for L&I to truly be able to operate at its full potential and fulfill its duty to keep building occupants, workers, and the public safe, the department needs increased investment from the city. That is something for which many of the trades have advocated on behalf of L&I to City Council, which it seems the city is working towards that, and we certainly applaud that. This being said, if there is to be increased funding for the department, it's important that there is proper oversight to ensure that L&I is following through with enforcement of professional licenses and building permits. I propose that a committee to oversee compliance be formed, comprising of labor, community members, and city council. By doing this, everyone affected would have a seat at the table to voice concerns and work towards solutions to issues as they arise. Thank you.
Thank you so very much for your testimony. We're going to ask you to stay on with us because once we get through the testimony from everyone on this panel, that's when we're going to open it up for questions from my colleagues. And the chair also wants to note for the record that our council member, Catherine Gilmore Richardson, she did type into the chat at 3:19 that she is having connectivity issues, but the remaining questions that she had for the commissioner, she will make sure she submits them and we will put them on the record, but she's going to try to log back on. With that being said, Bryant Myers, are you connected, Bryant?
Yes, can you hear me?
Oh, I can hear you now, Bryant.
Okay.
If you could state your name for the record and please proceed with your testimony.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Brian Myers. I'm the Assistant Training Director for ATI with Local 98 and the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. I've worked for Local 98 for the past 25 years. I've also been a principal member of NFPA 70, which is the National Electrical Code Making Panel, since 2005. I have extensive OSHA safety training, including OSHA 500 and NFPA 70 electrical safe work practices, and I've trained and taught and participated in those classes as well. I heard a lot of great things today, and one of which, first of all, Council Member Cheryl Parker, you nailed it right on the head in your opening statement, it was really refreshing and good to hear. We're sitting here, and in the haste to build quickly and cheaply, a lot of times these developers come from outside, and they take safety shortcuts, and they're endangering our workers' lives and our residents' lives, and we just don't want there to be, other tragedies, incidents in the city like we've had. We're a big advocate of training. Our membership goes through 8,000 man hours on the job, as well as 1,200 hours in the classroom. And we do everything from safety training, building automation, basic engineering, you name it, we do it here. And we have people actually that write the codes and standards that do it. And Mr. DiPietro pointed out, right? A lot of our complaints are technical in nature because we understand the business. We know it. We know what we're talking about because we're not just, working these job sites. We're actually writing the codes and standards nationally for them. So we need training, continued educations, and licensing. In the state of Pennsylvania, to be a hairdresser or a dog groomer, you need a license. Individuals installing life safety systems in the buildings in Philadelphia should at least require similar requirements. I think we all agree on that. Many of the developers, they'll turn around like at Salvation Army and Fourth and Market and Amazon, and they'll blame the accidents on workers' negligence. But that's like saying falls are due to gravity. Most of these workers are misclassified and undertrained and at worst, untrained. So of course it's due to workers. It's like throwing someone keys that never had driver's ed and then not expecting accidents to go up, right? There's a direct correlation there. We're in 2022 now, and in some of our codes and standards, we're a half-decade minimum behind the adoption of them. After collapses, permits still aren't being pulled. Workers don't have the required OSHA 10 minimum to work on job sites. Right now, we have a catch-me-if-you-can environment in Philadelphia because we don't nearly have enough inspectors. I consider inspectors, and I think we all should, first responders. They don't pull up in a police car. They don't show up in a fire truck. But they are our first responders to enforce the codes and standards that protect our people and our property in the city of Philadelphia. And I think they should be afforded the same respect. Inspectors should consider patrolling areas as part of their mission statement. We do it here in-house, all the building trades patrol areas. And I don't think the inspectors should do it any different, but they're overwhelmed with the challenge of keeping up with the amount of inspections and permits being pulled at this point in the city. There should be a minimum amount of inspection staffing in the city, and we should reach that so that they can have inspectors that just patrol certain areas and look for the jobs that are just going up throughout the city. I get the chance, like I mentioned earlier, to travel the country and visit certain seminars, and I've presented it at University of Michigan, University of Tennessee, various colleges throughout the country. And one of the things I ran into in Vegas after there was a bunch of dust explosions in the country in the 2000s was the Chemical Safety Board. And one of the things that they rely on is near misses. And I'm not sure how it works, but we advise our contractors to report near misses, not just accidents, because near misses are a leading indicator in predicting future accidents. If you think safety is too expensive, try having an accident. And I think we've all been there, and we've seen what happens to the psyche of the construction business after some of the bigger issues on small job sites that create waves throughout the industry. The thing that's coming up now is a lot of our emerging technologies. You see the EVITP, which is electrical vehicle training, and solar voltaics. Like I mentioned in Codes and Standards, I sit in on a lot of these discussions through different groups, and they talk about, we'll just get anyone to go install solar on rooftops. It's 90% of it's just a frame. That's not true at all. 90% of the framing is part of the grounding and bonding of those systems. In 690.4C, which is part of the National Electrical Code in the solar voltaics article, it makes a statement about qualified workers. And qualified workers aren't people that just go up and know how to install something. It's not only that, but understanding the hazards that arise from it. If you don't understand that the supports are the part of the grounding and bonding of the system of solar, and that the panels themselves, as long as they're in the sun, can kill you, then you're not qualified to work on that project. It also states in the National Electrical Code in Article 100 definitions that a qualified person has to have at least 40 hours of the electrical training or electrical training course, which we know as 70E, which is electrical safe work practices. So I think a lot of good things were said here today. I hope there's action taken. I'm really happy, and I'd like to thank the committee members for your time, interest, and responsiveness to these issues. Thank you for having me today, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Brian, for your testimony. Brian Edis, are you connected with us, Brian Edis?
I am, Chairwoman. How are you this evening or this afternoon?
I'm doing well. Just state your name for the record and feel free to proceed with your testimony.
Sure. Thank you, Council Member. My name is Brian Edis, and I am the business agent for the Philadelphia Building and Construction Trade Council. We are the umbrella organization that represent all the building trades in the southeastern region of Pennsylvania. I'm also a lifelong resident of Philadelphia, and I very deeply care about the city of Philadelphia and the citizens of Philadelphia. And I want to thank all the members of the panel, and especially Councilwoman Parker, for having this hearing. I've testified before City Council in regards to the underground economy and the need for more inspectors. So as grateful as I am for this hearing, I just also want to try to fill in the blanks. I submitted my testimony from 2019 to Rachel, and rather rehash that, I'd like to just touch on a couple things that I feel is important for this hearing. As we all know, there is a need for more inspectors, licensing inspectors, and the tens of millions of dollars that are lost each year. It was Dr. Steve Heisenberg, which I believe is also going to testify on the next panel. He did a study for the building trades back in 2018 or 2019 and shown that there's anywhere between $20 to $30 million lost annually with misclassification of workers, 1099 employees, people not licensed to work in the city, employers paying cash, not being paid workers' comp insurance, underreporting or not applying for permits at all. The BIRT tax, payroll, city taxes, just to name a few. And this affects everyone in the city of Philadelphia. And it's, they're responsible for putting people and property in danger by not having the trained workers and accountable contractors. The underground economy ultimately results, like I said, in tens of millions of dollars of lost revenue each year and uncollected taxes. This is unfair to the taxpaying citizen of the city of Philadelphia. So it's important that we're having this hearing. And there were solutions put in place back in 2018. The mayor put the L&I task force, or AKA the Audits and Investigations Unit, in place, and they were to strengthen oversight. And it is our position that not much has changed since then because we need more inspectors. People are saying that the leadership of L&I is complicit in the underground economy, and I'm not looking to assign blame or point fingers, but we do know that the L&I inspectors are doing the best they can. But I'm going to cite a couple of situations that I am, very in tune with, that I was personally involved with. I submitted over 100 311 requests between 2019 and 2021, and every single one of those 311 requests were found unsubstantiated. And I essentially copied and pasted the codes from the code book of L&I, and they were, like I said, they were all found unsubstantiated. And, Councilwoman Sanchez had mentioned about the exploitation of workers, and we all care very deeply for that. And part of the exploitation were the 1099 workers, being the only avenue for these undocumented workers to work on these construction sites. And one of the codes in the code book was to list all subcontractors working on. Now, this is a workers' protection plan for us. We're not looking to exploit or expose as much as we are looking to protect the workers that are on this site, because it is our duty, our job to really organize these workers. But if they're underground and they're not being, provided with proper pay and protections on the job sites, it's almost impossible for us to really help them. There's countless calls to L&I with no solutions. And for us, this almost seems like it's an anti-building trades environment. Like I said, the L&I Construction Task Force, the audit investigations, it was shut down for months back in 2019 and 2020 with no explanation. I want to point out a single person that applied to be an L&I inspector. He is a resident of 19120, Councilwoman Parker, your area. I was also a resident of 19120. Dan Myers, he's a union iron worker, local 401. He also has a college degree, a bachelor's degree from Penn State University, and he was on the list to be an L&I inspector for over 3 years and was never hired from 2018 up until 2021. And, he ended up being expired on the list and was never hired. He was told to retake the test again. So to me, that just doesn't make any sense. With a need for these additional L&I inspectors, and you had the perfect candidate, someone that went through our safety training, because the Philadelphia Building Trades collectively spend over $42 million each and every year on our JATC programs collectively among all the trades. So we end up being the ideal candidates for these L&I inspectors, and in most cases where they're ready to step right into those roles. And finally, the one thing that I want to point out, and how important communication is, in any realm or any avenue really, the communication with the building trades agents and L&I is poor, to say the least. They won't meet with the trades. We have to call council members or even the mayor's office really to get anything done. And there's so many hurdles and no cooperation. We feel as though that it's discriminatory against the building trades and unions, and there's also inspectors that are leaving. You had cited the Marriott project, and, Commissioner DePietro had talked about the countless visits that were made to that Marriott building. There was a inspector, last name Crossley, that was one of those inspectors who was sent out there. He ended up quitting his job was L&I because he was pretty much put on desk duty. He was not able to do his job. So, like I said, I really, really love the conversation. I think communication is important. I'm happy to be a part of it today, and I'm also happy to answer any questions from the members of the panel and anyone else. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Edis, for your testimony. And Rachel, before I go to the Q&A portion, did anyone else we expected to participate on panel 2? Has anyone else arrived?
So I do see that there's some individuals from the Carpenters who are on, and I didn't know if anyone was prepared to testify or if they were just listening in. I see James Hawker.
Okay, we'll ask, so I know who I have here listed for panel 2. If there will be a time when we will get to the hearing, at the end of the hearing, where we will ask if there is anyone here remaining who wishes to testify and put some comments on the record. We will give you the opportunity to do so, but now we're going to engage in the Q&A for panel 2. And Todd, I want you to come back, Todd, because I want to go back to your testimony. And I appreciated you getting this on the record. And again, for the record and the benefit of the viewing public, I have the great honor and privilege of serving as council's chair of the Committee on Labor and Civil Service. And so I get a lot of questions and concerns from a lot of organizations, unions, domestic workers, it could be service workers, the building trades, about work sites. And so I'm reading this testimony, Todd, and you referenced something that we just talked to the commissioner about, and that is this idea of having everyone at the table, not just this auditing inspection unit, but a task force or a standard operating procedure sort of work group that is associated with misclassification of employees as independent contractors, the payroll tax fraud, and or construction. So whether that's L&I, that's revenue, any other department who we would need the district attorney's office, because they have, again, the Department of Economic Crimes, everyone meeting to ensure that all stakeholders are at the table in discussing ways that we can investigate, streamline processes, and to be quite honest, just to make our overall investigatory process much more efficient. Is that something, Todd, that you think would be welcome? Because you talk about this briefly in your testimony. Is that something that you think would be helpful to enforcement?
I mean, yes, I think that would be helpful. I mean, you need a situation where all like you said, all stakeholders have a voice and are at the table. I mean, I was kind of referring more so to an oversight board where, just to ensure that basically if there's new funding, ensuring that funding is actually being used to hire more inspectors, to make sure that the enforcement is happening. I mean, you could label it however you want, but so essentially, that is kind of where I was going. But there needs to be voices, from and the commissioner mentioned, the trades have the technical knowledge. We definitely have the technical knowledge when it comes to this stuff. The community members, this is their neighborhood. This is their neighborhood. They should have a voice at the table. And obviously, council, you guys are, you're running the city with the mayor. So I think it's important to have everybody involved with that. Yes.
No, I appreciate your affirming that. Someone listening could say, well, after listening, I think what he just described for us is that he wants to see some performance management enacted and sort of results oriented budgeting, whereupon any investment, what does it yield for residents of the city of Philadelphia in enhancing public safety and ensure that the issues that we're talking about here today are not occurring. Any of my colleagues have any questions for this panel? That would be Todd, Bryant Myers, and then Brian Edis. Any further questions? With that being said, I do want to get this on the record. Brian Edis, and I want to make sure I heard you correctly because I'm taking my own notes. Brian, did you say that between 2019 and 2021, you have made at least 100 or over in terms of the number of calls 2311 requesting investigations at different sites, but that those investigations came back and were found unsubstantiated? I want to make sure I heard you correctly.
Thank you, Councilwoman. So it was 2018 and 2020 were the
2018 and 2020.
That I made over 100 301 requests to L&I for code issues, and every single one of them were found unsubstantiated.
Okay. Alrighty. And let me just ask this of any of you, and I asked this of the commissioner, and I want you to tell me whether or not that is just something that my constituents and Philadelphians report to me, or how often do you see this idea of unlicensed contractors sort of making their normal work hours the hours that usually start at night, like 9 or 10 o'clock, and then they work through the night and may stop when the sun comes up. And usually we find that when this occurs, especially if they're using equipment that makes noise, it's a nuisance to residents in neighborhoods across the city. But I really hear it in neighborhoods where growth and construction is bustling and or illegal conversions. Is this anything that you all have seen? And would you like to make any comment about it before we move on to the next panel? This is for Todd, Bryant Myers, or Brian Edis. Thank you all so very much. If you have any additional comments that you want to get on the record about the time of day that you see work being done in our communities, and that it's highly likely that when you do see contractors doing work with machines that make lots of noise in the middle of the night, they are not usual licensed contractors operating and doing things by the book in our great city. I'll ask my colleagues, is there anyone who have any final questions for members of this panel? Hearing none, Rachel, I want you to please call those members who are scheduled to testify for panel 3.
Yes, we have Ben Connors, Steve Herzenberg, Michael Froelich, and Michelle Gaffney.
Thank you all so very much. And wow, I see all three of you at the same time. So this is good. I will follow the order. I'm going to ask Ben Connors from the GBCA if you would begin, Ben, and just state your name for the record, and feel free to proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Councilwoman. I'm Ben Connors, President and CEO of the General Building Contractors Association. GBCA has a membership of over 300 commercial, industrial, institutional, general contractors, subcontractors, and construction service firms throughout the greater Philadelphia region. We'd like to thank the Councilmember Parker, for holding this hearing today and calling attention to this important issue. I'm here on behalf of legitimate construction industry to express our concern about the impact of the underground economy in Philadelphia. Our industry in Philadelphia employs tens of thousands of workers. We pay a fair wage rate to our union workforce, and consequently pay millions of dollars in taxes to the city of Philadelphia. Our members are the ones with the cranes in the air, building the museums, the hospitals, the laboratories, the apartments, dormitories, hotels, and the list goes on. The margins of these projects are slim at times, and in large part due to burdens of high taxes, safety regulations, licensure, employment requirements require us to operate in the city of Philadelphia legally and properly. Unscrupulous contractors who classify employees as independent contractors avoid providing living wages, health insurance, retirement benefits, unemployment insurance, and workers' compensation insurance. This is to the detriment of the employees and puts everyone's safety at risk. This type of illegal construction is obviously very hard for governments and associations to quantify. We did see a study from Stockton University that reported that New Jersey's total underground economy was estimated to be between $7.3 and $16.3 billion in economic activity. Averaging across various academic and government studies, about 19% of the self-employed construction workers nationwide are misclassified as independent contractors. It can be hard to determine, but there are steps that we believe City Hall can take without disrupting legitimate contractors. We believe license and inspections plays a key role, and their inspectors should be able to ensure that all permitted projects have permitted contractors working on site, thus ensuring everyone working on the project is paid up on their appropriate city taxes. The Department of Revenue can also hire more inspectors to audit the payrolls of identified projects. And unfortunately, right now, we believe both departments are understaffed and overworked as it is. GBCA respectfully asks the City Council and the administration to consider during this budgeting cycle to budget additional resources to ensure that both departments can more proactively attempt to remedy this situation. The members of the General Building Contractors Association are committed to working with council and the administration, and especially revenue and license and inspection departments, to determine the best practices to end illegal construction activity in Philadelphia once and for all. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Connors, for your testimony. Please be patient with us and stay on. We're going to get through the testimony of everyone on this panel, and then immediately following, we want to open it up for questions to the panel. So thank you so very much. We're now going to ask Steve Hersenberg from the Keystone Research Center to state your name for the record, and please feel free to give your testimony.
Thanks so much, Councilwoman Parker. I'm Stephen Herzenberg. I'm an economist and the executive director of the Keystone Research Center, which is a Pennsylvania-based think tank now in its 27th year. Thanks for the opportunity to testify at these hearings in response to Resolution 220249. I want to start by congratulating the City Council for holding these hearings. People often say that the first step to solving a problem is acknowledging that it exists. In this case, the first step likely includes fully reckoning with the extent and nature of the problem. Without having done firsthand research on the Philadelphia building industry, and without having at hand recent research on Philadelphia specifically by others, my inference from research on Philadelphia a decade or so ago and research in other parts of the U.S. is that the city likely has a very serious problem with lack of enforcement of building and construction codes, an understaffed Department of Licenses and Inspections, and a residential and possibly light commercial construction labor market in which workers are not so much misclassified as it is that the industry operates partly on a cash basis beyond the reach of U.S., Pennsylvania, and Philadelphia labor law. The research I mentioned above on the Philadelphia residential construction industry that was done a little over a decade ago was based on interviews with 96 immigrant workers. Natasha Iskander and Nicola Lowe found that the small-scale contractors and freelance flippers who predominated then in City of Philadelphia housing construction and renovation relied primarily on a labor market that was largely informal. That is, it operated essentially outside the boundaries of U.S. labor law. In a variation of classic piecework, workers in crews of 2 to 6 would receive materials at the beginning of the day and be told, "I'll be back in 6 hours. I'll give you X dollars." Other workers lived in unfinished buildings in exchange for rehabbing them. These cash economy workers were beyond the reach of U.S. labor standards. This made it difficult, perhaps impossible, for developers and contractors who would abide by the law to compete. Iskander and Lowe also documented in a very recent article, but based on the same field research, high rates of injury on the job in Philadelphia residential construction. Fully a third of workers that they interviewed suffered injuries on the job that took them out of work for a week or more. Injuries resulted partly from the use of unfamiliar power tools and partly from inadequately designed scaffolding. The city's Department of Licenses and Inspection staff, officially responsible for compliance with permitting requirements and building codes, but nonetheless with expertise on safety, would end up in the unfamiliar role of providing on-the-spot advice on how to improve scaffolding or strengthen temporary retaining walls built on demolition jobs. Quote, "A lot of contractors will put their employees in positions that make us cringe," explained one inspector, "and that is when L and I will issue stop work orders to get people out for their own safety." Commissioner DiPietro and LI inspectors today can tell you whether the picture Iskander and Lowe paint captures part of the reality today in Philadelphia residential construction, and also how much that reality has spread to commercial construction. The tenor of research across the country on the construction industry is that the cash economy has grown, not shrunk, in the past dozen years, and worker misclassification and payroll fraud have become more pervasive. Keystone Research Center estimated in the 2009 study that was referenced by a previous testifier based on studies of other states, that misclassification costs Pennsylvania as much as $137 million annually in unemployment compensation, workers' comp, premiums, and state income taxes. On a prorated basis, this implies a cost of $17 million annually in the city of Philadelphia. And again, I think that estimate is likely well below the actual cost of these kinds of violations and failure to pay basic social insurance. I would be very surprised if Philadelphia residential construction has against trend come back above ground and into compliance with basic labor standards in the dozen years since Iskander and Lowe did their work. Assuming the problem is as severe as in 2010 or more so, we get to the second step of fixing a problem, solutions. There's been a bunch of good ideas talked about today, obviously including the idea of having more inspectors and more training for inspectors. But here I'm going to offer some other policy recommendations in the spirit of brainstorming. There are no bad ideas. These are grist for your mill and for consideration as City Council and the city go forward. The broadest recommendation is that the city seek to bring the Philadelphia residential and, if necessary, commercial construction industry back above ground. That won't be easy. That said, it may be a bit easier today because of so-called workforce shortages. If workers generally have a bit more leverage than before the pandemic, that leverage could extend to vulnerable workers in the construction cash economy. Turning now to some more specific options which complement one another and are meant to suggest the outline of a holistic strategy for the city. The first of all, explore the potential to incorporate experienced cash economy and construction workers into building trades unions in the city. This would be a version of a long-standing construction trades union organizing approach, stripping non-union contractors, in this case cash economy developers, of their workers. Given the demand for construction workers currently and the years of experience in Mexico and the United States that some of these workers have, a substantial number could be strong apprenticeship candidates and able to test out of the first 1 or more years of apprenticeship. Second, and this speaks in a sense directly to the prior testifier, identify an ally with high road contractors committed to abiding by the law in Philadelphia, residential and commercial construction, and convince that they can do it if the city strategically acts to drive underground contractors out of business. It will be difficult to bring the industry back above ground without contractor partners. Third, formally partner on enforcement with unions and with community organizations and networks embedded in the demographic groups that work in cash economy construction. This is an approach that leading cities, including San Francisco, have pioneered in the last decade, with community organizations receiving grant funds to cover the cost of their reporting on potential misclassification or other labor law violations. Fourth, make an example of repeat violators. Bringing cash economy construction above ground will likely require driving some developers out of business, those who are most resistant to operating their construction project legally. Fifth, explore the option to increase penalties for violations and use those penalties to pay for additional inspectors and other costs of upgraded enforcement. Sixth, I've only got 3 more. Sixth, don't go it alone, part 1. This was sort of alluded to earlier, conduct a best practice survey of efforts in other cities and states to combat misclassification and other construction industry labor standards violations. City of DC started a construction enforcement effort a couple of years ago. In Texas, there's a group called the Workers' Defense Project that has done some terrific work in very difficult circumstances with a lot of undocumented workers. We can learn from them. Seventh, don't go it alone, part 2. Again, there's been allusions to this. Partner with other Pennsylvania enforcement authorities and the Biden administration for greater collective impact. So Attorney General Josh Shapiro started a fair labor section that's doing some good work. The Pennsylvania legislature, by statute, and at the urging of several of the building trades, charged a joint task force on misclassification with producing a report with actionable recommendations. It's a terrific 30-page report with 15 practical recommendations, many of which include the kind of interagency cooperation and data sharing that Councilwoman Parker and Sanchez emphasized in some of their questions, and which is the bread and butter of so-called strategic enforcement. Let's see. I mean, there's more in the written testimony, but I know it's late. So sort of suggested we could have an annual conference of different Pennsylvania entities involved in enforcement and construction. And I might invite New Jersey because they're doing some really good work recently. They passed a bunch of misclass laws, and under Governor Murphy and Commissioner of Labor Rob Bissaro Angelo are really trying to do good work. And the last one is self-promotion, but that's okay. Don't go it alone, part 3. Ask Keystone Research Center and its networks for help. I mean, as I hope this testimony communicates, we're pretty good friends and have partnered with a bunch of the best researchers in this area in the country. Right now, we're privileged to be working on a book that a guy called Mark Ehrlich, who used to be the leader of one of the leaders of the New England Carpenters. He's writing a University of Illinois book on construction. And, the guy's been in the industry 40 years, and he's a terrific writer, and he knows what the hell he's talking about. Again, these are hard problems to solve, but I sense in your efforts a real will, and we'd be thrilled to more formally try to add some of our capacity and some of our connections to an attempt to slay this dragon. I'm done.
Thank you so very much. Thank you so very much, Steve. Michael, are you on? Are you still with us?
I still am, and can you hear me okay?
Okay, I can see you and hear you. Just state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony. And Steve, and please, you and Ben, please just stay on for quick Q&A. Thank you so much, Mike, for your patience.
Great. No, thank you so much, Council Member, for holding this very important hearing. My name is Michael Froelich, and I'm the managing attorney of the Home Ownership and Consumer Rights Unit here at Community Legal Services. And I'm very pleased to testify on Resolution 220249 on behalf of our clients here at Community Legal Services. As the committee knows, CLS is a nonprofit legal aid office that provides free legal representation to low-income Philadelphians. We represent clients with a variety of civil legal matters, including home ownership issues. Philadelphia has always prided itself on being a city of homeowners. Just over half, 52%, of Philadelphia households own their homes, and a significant percentage of these households, including all of our clients, are low income. But with skyrocketing home values, competition from all-cash private investors, and equity stripping schemers such as the predatory residential property wholesaling industry, the American dream of homeownership for many of our clients is under attack. And just as DC 33 President Ernest Garrett was testifying about earlier in this hearing, this is why preserving these intergenerational family homes of our clients is so important. Over the last 3 years, homeowners have increasingly come to CLS with complaints that construction in their tight neighborhoods was damaging their own homes. Often, builders purchased older properties, demolished them, and then rebuilt larger buildings, digging deeper and building taller. This demolition and construction is too often done carelessly and by less than reputable contractors. And at the same time as clients began coming to CLS seeking assistance, we began to hear from our community partners in rapidly gentrifying neighborhoods that this was an important issue for them. The foundations of adjacent row homes, Council Member, as you mentioned earlier, were being undermined. Holes were being punched into party walls, or party walls were being left exposed after demolition, permitting water intrusion into adjacent homes. Next door homes were shifting so that doors and windows no longer opened or closed. Brick facades were tumbling off of homes. Contractors were trespassing on the next door properties without permission. Some were even ripping up porches and backyards and damaging roofs to gain access to do the construction. Sometimes damage from adjacent demolition and construction results in the evacuation and the condemnation of the adjacent homes for safety reasons. Innocent, long-time homeowners are experiencing months of harassment and are often being forced out of their homes. To make matters worse, long-time homeowners often do not have homeowners insurance, or if they do, their insurance precludes claims for damage caused by the negligence of contractors on neighboring properties. Often, homeowners' only recourse at that point is to hire an attorney to sue for damages, an option that unfortunately is largely out of reach for many of our low-income homeowners. The Department of License and Inspections has a really important role to play here in ensuring that contractors are licensed and that work is permitted and done carefully and to code. L&I needs the resources to not just address reported issues, as has been discussed many times so far in this hearing, but to take more preventative measures and to do more to patrol construction activity to ensure that new building does not damage existing homes. As the highlight, or as the text of the resolution for this hearing highlights, experienced construction inspectors are a scarce resource, and recruiting and training new inspectors is a lengthy and challenging process. The resolution goes on, with regards to construction specifically, the City of Philadelphia is not adequately investing in building and construction code enforcement or addressing the critical shortages in inspectors. Last week, during the budget hearings, Commissioner DiPietro testified that there are currently 53 open inspector positions and that the department is bringing on 2 cohorts of 20 new inspectors each. We're very appreciative of the department's efforts here to fill these positions, and we look forward to working closely with the department. Again, thank you for the opportunity to testify at today's hearing. This is a critical moment for home ownership and housing issues in our city. And on behalf of our clients, we're grateful for City Council and L&I for rising to meet this moment. Thanks.
Thank you so very much for your testimony. Lots of questions, so just please hold on for us. Michelle Gaffney, are you here, Michelle Gaffney?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, thank you so much. I have your testimony. If you could state for your name for the record and proceed, we greatly appreciate it.
Thank you, members of committee. My name is Michelle Gaffney. I'm a homeowner in Old Richmond, here to testify on Resolution 220249. I do not have a background in construction. Rather, my experience is in project management, operations, and communications, especially between departments. Since October 2020, I've been acting as a community advocate and consultant for adjacent construction safety and residents' rights. I help victims to document, report, and seek resolutions for their plight. I also work with aid organizations to help build their capacity to similarly assist residents. In fact, I've worked with Michael Froelich on a case as a case manager while I documented the evolving situation. In my work, I act as a resource and a bridge across a massive communications and knowledge gap between L&I and residents. Construction issues between residents and developers are extremely complex, as we all know on this panel, and it requires a significant investment of time and research to navigate the various agencies and recourses that are available. And that's something that most residents don't have to spare. This burden on impacted residents is a full-time job, and right now it falls to unqualified residents and self-taught volunteers and consultants like me to do it. And in doing this work, I've observed major issues that are pretty recurring at construction sites. I've observed dangerous work sites that ignore safety procedures. I've seen notorious developers who've been cited with frequent violations escape accountability by using LLCs and shifting the blame to the contractors that they chose to hire. Offenders do not communicate with neighbors, as Michael highlighted, and they endanger their laborers because they know that both of these groups usually don't have the information that they need or the protections that they deserve. These bad actors also take advantage of L&I's enforcement limitations. They know that the responsiveness to 311 is not going to be timely. They skip steps because they don't expect to be caught. And if they are, they will just pay the fine. They know that when damage occurs, it's considered a civil matter, and most adjacent residents won't have access to structural engineers, lawyers, or legal services. And they seem to count on a resident becoming so overwhelmed that they give up. This gap between the city and its residents creates extra work for L&I. Residents do not understand the role of inspectors, let alone whether an issue should be reported to L&I or to another agency entirely, as the commissioner mentioned earlier, for example, air management services when it comes to dust in the air. Residents submit to 311, but they don't hear back, and then they'll start making phone calls to anyone who will answer, because it truly feels like an emergency situation in a lot of these cases. This cultivates a general feeling that the city does not prioritize the safety or concerns of its tax-paying residents and places a burden across agencies and offices that are powerless to help residents with these issues. Residents become frustrated and resentful, and it becomes this vicious cycle that repeats over and over again. I'd like to point out that the Committee of Licenses and Inspections have already held similar hearings to this one, and they included many of these concerns on February 21st, 2020, and that was for resolution number 200043. So here we are 2 years later, and L&I's workload has steeply increased. According to Pew Research, more than 26,000 building permits were issued in 2021, which is 5 times the amount issued in 2020, 2019, or other past years. I believe the commissioner mentioned something around 395 site visits by AIU last year. With 26,000 new building permits in a year, in addition to active work sites that are already permitted, 395 site visits clearly is not going to cover the amount that might need to be investigated at any given point in time. So a caseload increase like this not only stands to increase burnout in the L&I inspectors and staff, but also to encourage inspectors to speed through their obligations to meet an increased caseload. It also risks an exponential increase in the volume of harm, damages, displacement, and financial burden on your constituents that was already happening prior to the increase. So I would ask that Council engage qualified data analysis experts to investigate the following items: the impact of actions that were and were not taken after the hearing in 2020, and the impacts of 5 times more permits on L&I staff burnout, staff turnover rates, the volume of construction site complaints, and the volume of violations issued. If you take nothing else away from my testimony today, please remember this point here. The overwhelming workload that L&I inspectors are facing is not just about the number of inspectors on staff. The city must look at what is working, what isn't working, and what could be missing from the equation altogether. Residents need access to information and expert support when they're impacted by adjacent construction so that they don't bog down an already overwhelmed system with misguided attempts to get help. So with that in mind, my recommendations include the following. Create a staff department or position dedicated to fielding constituent construction concerns and triaging those reports. Make this role or department responsible for redirecting those reports to the correct agencies, for educating residents so that L&I staff can focus on their duties, and following up with residents so that this perception that the commissioner spoke about earlier, that nothing has happened, can be addressed and can alleviate some redundant calls and outreach to L&I, taking up more and more of their time. I would also say that we need to create a program or provide funding to existing services that is earmarked for connecting impacted residents to engineer and legal services. In addition, create a developer's license so that developers can be held accountable from job site to job site, just like contractors. These repeat offenders at the developer level, they hire the workers that they hire, they exploit the labor that they exploit, and whether the LLC is the same from job site to job site or not, it's still the same person behind it making those business decisions that are harming our communities and our labor forces. I'd also ask for monitoring construction sites across the multiple city agencies in order to identify major offenders racking up violations and investigate those offenders and ban them from building here in Philadelphia if necessary. I have 2 more points on here. Moderate the volume of permits so that L&I inspectors are never stretched too thin. The city cannot allow the revenue brought in by permit application fees to act as an incentive to issue more permits than L&I can reasonably monitor and enforce. And lastly, review the testimonials from the 2020 hearing and take action on them. Many of the points raised today are almost exact quotes and repeats from what was brought up in 2020. And I recognize that February 21st, 2020, we didn't know what we were about to get hit with by the end of March. We lost momentum there, and we were in desperate need of immediate action then, and we are beyond overdue for immediate action and relief now. So I implore the council to go back to those tapes, to the transcription, and take the lessons from already very robust testimony and research and apply them to this effort today. I thank you again for your time and your consideration, and I look forward to continuing to communicate with this committee on these issues. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so very much. And from the schedule that I have, Michelle will be the final person to testify on this panel. Michael, I want to start with you in community legal services. And I want to start with you because from a consumer protection perspective, one doesn't expect CLS to be an active participant in a hearing about worker misclassification, about construction in the city of Philadelphia. I want you, if you will, because what we've done now is we've read anecdotes, and Michael, you've been around for a long time. This sounds very much like what we went through with predatory lending. I was a staffer here in City Council working with Irv Ecclesburg and Acorn and a whole lot of other people during that time. And we thought that these were just anecdotes in neighborhoods with homeowners that were black and brown, and they told us that the market would correct itself as it related to the issuance of those loans. I want you to tell me about the volume. We've read the articles about homeowners who have been impacted, particularly with water damage in the building of new construction. The woman says she moved into a house in an article that I read, and didn't know that 2 years or a year and a half, like months after the warranty on her home had expired, she noticed that there was this water damage, and she was no longer covered. And now she owns this home, doesn't have the disposable income needed to correct this. Tell us whether or not this is something from a volume perspective. Are the requests for that engineering legal support that Michelle recommended as one of the recommended solutions to helping to address this issue, is that volume picking up in neighborhoods across the city, or is this just in neighborhoods that we see that are growing? Tell us about who that constituent is reaching out to CLS.
Yeah, that you're absolutely right, Councilmember Parker, that historically, Irv Ecclesburg and others here at CLS, we've sort of, when we talk about home ownership, we talk about saving people's homes from the banks. Right. And saving people's homes, from the other predators that are out there. We never really thought about, well, gosh, I guess saving somebody's home from sort of from a unsafe excavation happening and unsafe underpinning of the foundation wall. And I can pinpoint it. It was in June or July of 2019 that people started coming to CLS reporting these issues, and it happened, where we got 3, 4, 5 a month, and people would come to us, and then so at that point, as we do a lot of times with emerging issues like this, we reach out to our community partners. Folks like the groups that Michelle is involved in, organizations in Parkside, in West Philly, Strawberry Mansion, organizations in West Philadelphia, in the 3rd District as well, to say, started getting a lot of people coming to us with these issues. Is this something you're hearing? And that's when we got sort of like, the dams burst and people said, I'd love to talk with you more about these issues. And started really realizing the volume that there actually is of homeowners, because too often, as I mentioned in my testimony, the only real sort of, once the damage has been done, the only option that somebody has is to sue the builder and to try to figure out, how to get money out of the builder to repair their home. Because if they have their own homeowner's insurance, then their own homeowner's insurance doesn't pay for it. It all ties back into the same thing, right? Because why don't a lot of people have homeowner's insurance? Unfortunately, part of the problem is tangled titles. If your name is not on your deed, you're not able to get homeowners insurance. So as we untangle titles for folks across the country, we are encouraging people to get homeowners insurance, but as I mentioned, that oftentimes doesn't resolve the issue. So, the volume is picking up, has picked up, has stayed steady through the pandemic, and we're hoping that as LNI, and LNI has been a terrific partner on this. I should mention they need more inspectors. They need to take additional steps to sort of stop this from happening in the past, or starts happening in the future. To do more prophylactic work, as Michelle mentioned, a number of programmatic changes that LNI can be making. But we now do see, preserving people's home from careless construction next door as being part of what we talk about when we talk about preserving intergenerational family homes here at CLS.
So not only home ownership, and this will become a barrier to Philadelphians building generational wealth if the most valuable asset they have is negatively impacted from a public safety perspective by these unscrupulous developers and or contractors. So I want you to understand, Michael and Michelle, what you have just said here today as it relates to neighborhood preservation and home preservation. You all have just put on the record for us that we need to ensure that engineering and legal services for Philadelphia residents who've been negatively impacted by this activity, that needs to come under the umbrella right now of neighborhood preservation and home preservation. Am I putting words in your mouth, or is that what you all are saying to us here today?
I think that's part of it. I think LNI, and I think lots of folks have a role to play in this, and I think legal services could be a big part of it as well.
That Michelle, I want you to comment on this because you very specifically bullet number 2 in your recommendations. And first, let me state for the record, I was not a part of a hearing in 2020, nor was I a member of the Committee on Licenses and Inspections. We do and did in preparation for this meeting look at, and review for context that hearing. But until I got prepared for this one, I knew nothing about, from a very specific perspective, what was recommended there. But in bullet 2, for members of the viewing public, Michelle recommends to us that we should create a program or provide funding to existing services specifically earmarked for connecting impacted residents to engineer and legal services. Michelle, just walk us through it, since you said you've been dealing directly with residents, community-based organizations, about why folks who don't have an accountant or a lawyer, on retainer, would need access to this kind of support. And listen, we've got a lot of things commanding access to our scarce resources. Why would a pilot like this, funding legal aid organizations or engineer organizations to make their technical supports available for Philadelphians who are impacted, why would that matter? And why does it require, or should it require, the investment of taxpayer dollars?
Yeah, happy to elaborate on that. So Michael can attest, because he and I have been working closely together on one of the many cases that are on his plate right now, of an adjacent construction damaging a resident's home, and that resident doesn't have the resources or the knowledge to understand what rights of theirs are being trespassed upon in the first place, what rights they have or don't have, and any kind of recourse for reparations, which, as Michael stated, requires a civil suit in almost every single case, because the city treats this as a civil issue between two different property owners. Whereas the balance of power between those two people and resources and finances is extremely asymmetrical. So you have a developer with a significant amount of resources, lawyers on payroll, and time that residents maybe don't have. And then you have a resident, like, for example, one of the folks that I work with is a widow in her 70s who lives in a twin home that half of it was demolished. She's on Social Security. She lives alone. She was being actively traumatized by this experience. The developer did not give her notice or communicate with her about, hey, we expect to be working on these days versus not these days. So she would be woken up in the morning to her whole home vibrating. She would find cracks in her walls, not have anyone answer her. She never got any kind of reassurance in writing. She didn't even know about the concept of an access agreement to potentially protect her in the event that someone was on her property and they fall on her property, for example. There are many things that homeowners I've found just don't know about what they're responsible for or not responsible for in the first place in these situations. So when it comes to a situation like this where a resident who maybe is not so tech savvy or is not knowledgeable about the processes of construction in the first place is now experiencing damages to their home that they've lived in for however long, that has gained however much equity. And in this case, this being a senior citizen, she has her taxes frozen from a very long time ago. And the neighborhood that she's in now, the home values have skyrocketed. So if she had to leave her home for whatever reason, she would not be able to afford to stay in the neighborhood that she's in. So this goes back to the displacement of our residents, both elderly and communities of color, and all over the city this is happening. So the reason I would say that putting those resources in towards legal services and engineering services is, especially in this particular case, what we were able to do once the developer needed direct access to the property for long enough to put vinyl siding on the side that touched her property, we were able to say, stop, give them this email address. We have to negotiate for this to be, the damages to be looked at by an engineer and for an agreement to be signed. Because at this point, you've trespassed on her roof multiple times. We need it to be in writing and we need her to be protected. We were able to get the developer to pay a $5,000 retainer for an engineer. She does not have that kind of money. The engineer graciously put some of the time that he put into the visit inspecting her house into research for other projects he's doing anyway. Otherwise, it would have been more than $5,000. So he was already going out of his way to reduce his cost to be able to do this inspection for this elderly woman. And because I've been documenting her case since April of last year with photo and video, his report was 25 pages long with extremely thorough explanations of all of the things that have happened as a result of careless contractor behavior, and some of which has received violations from L&I in the past as well. So this is a very, very complex situation. There's more details about it that I'm not going to share here today. The only reason that this woman received the help that she did was because I volunteered my time to watch her property like a hawk, report and document everything, found Michael and connected her to Michael. She happened to qualify for CLS's services. CLS was able to help her start the process of writing an access agreement, which led to the engineering report. The engineer donated some of his time, and we were lucky that the developer was willing to pay any of that amount. And on top of all of that, now she needs even more legal assistance to navigate the negotiations of repairs, which
the reason why
Michael was able to get people to.
The reason why, Michelle, I asked you, both you and Michael, that question is because, if we're going to even make the plea during these budget negotiations that even if a pilot program is started that will provide assistance, access to an attorney and or an engineer or any other construction related professional to help a Philadelphia resident who has been impacted, in this way through no fault of their own. We needed to sort of get that affirmation on a record. So I want to thank both of you for responding. I did just get a note that we have an AVI monitoring group meeting that is coming up. So I'm going to ask if this is at all possible. Ben Connors from GPCA. Ben, you talked about a Stockton report. Did I hear that right, Ben? Did you reference a Stockton study?
Yes, ma'am.
If you have access to it, Ben, would you mind forwarding a copy of that study to my office? I would greatly appreciate it, as we're sort of putting together some data for advocacy. We can distribute that to all members of the committee, and we will make sure we get that done. And to Steve, we're going to ask you, Steve, you referenced two things that really piqued my interest. One was the San Francisco sort of model, the community organizations receiving grants to make these reports. And you also mentioned the DC Construction Enforcement Agency, if I heard you correct during your testimony. If you could forward that information to our office, that would be extremely helpful, and we'll distribute it to all members of the committee along with the administration. With that being said, I want to ask, are there any questions or comments from members of the committee regarding resolution number 220249? Any further comments?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Yes.
Councilman Brian O'Neill.
Yes, thank you, Councilmember O'Neill.
I've been involved with these issues for a long time. Not much seems to change. At least we have the COVID excuse this time for maybe those hearings in February of 20 not going anywhere. But I'm not sure it would have made a difference based on past history. The one thing I heard today that I would like to make sure we focus on is the developer role in all this. Because when we get zoning cases, when we get complaints, it's the developer that is the known bad guy. Track record, the whole bit. And they're just looking for the cheapest way of doing it. And believe me, if we could find a way to hurt their pocketbook and to hold them up to public exposure, we would really accomplish something. So I'm not sure what the best way is, but Michelle pointed it out, explained it, and if you've been around this for a long time, that is the main culprit. Everybody else is a bit player. The developer's the commander-in-chief. So if we can do something with that, it would be really productive. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Councilmember O'Neill, for your experience and just for bringing that issue to light. You are right. 1, 2, 3. The third recommendation that Michelle includes in her testimony is that we should consider creating a developer's license here in the city of Philadelphia so that developers can be held accountable from job site to job site, just like contractors. And we want you to know we have it. None of it fell on deaf ears, and we will take all of these recommendations into consideration.
Madam Chair,
yes, Councilmember O'Neill.
Personally responsible, not hiding behind an LLC that they don't even have a signature on the loan, personal signature on, and you're chasing no one at that point. Personally responsible starts getting their attention. Thank you.
I like that, Councilmember O'Neill. Thank you so very much for getting that on the record. Again, I want to ask, are there any further comments and or questions from members of the committee? There being no more questions or comments from members of the committee and no other witnesses to testify on bill numbers 220186 and 220261 or resolution number 220249, I will ask if there's anyone else present in this hearing whose name we have failed to call and they wish to offer testimony on any of these bills or resolutions being considered. Let me just put up the chat. Hearing none, I want to thank our witnesses for their participation today. We want you to know that we value your opinions, and we are now going to recess the public hearing and go into the public meeting to consider the action to be taken on bill numbers 220186 and 220261. I want to thank my colleagues for their patience today, and I'm glad we did make sure we checked with all members, because we would not have been able to get the salient advice that our veteran council member Brian O'Neill just put on the record. So again, thank you all for your patience. We are now going to convene the public meeting. I'm going to ask all of those who testified to please disconnect at this time. As we convene our public meeting, Rachel, I'm going to ask you to call the roll to take attendance. Members that are in attendance will please indicate that you are present when your name is called. Also, please say a few brief words when responding so that your image will be displayed on screen when you speak.
Vice Chair Brian O'Neill. I know he was here.
Sorry about that. I was on the script on my other website.
Councilmember. Okay, Councilmember Alan Dom.
Present. Thank you.
Councilmember Derek Green.
I am present.
And Councilmember Helen Gem.
Present.
Madam Chair, for the record, I hope you can hear me. This is Councilmember Catherine Gilmore Richardson. I am present.
Thank you. Thank you so very much, Councilmember Gilmore Richardson. Rachel, I think we now have a quorum. Am I correct?
Yes, we have more than a quorum.
Okay, so thank you. The chair recognizes Councilmember O'Neill for a motion on the amendment to bill number 220186. I know we've been having some technical difficulties here today, so I want to ask members of the viewing public to thank you so very much for your patience. Councilmember Green, do you have I'm sorry. Again, viewing public, thank you so very much for your patience. We are having some audio and video technical challenges today. Is Councilmember O'Neill still connected?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now,
Okay.
Councilmember O'Neill.
Thank you. I offer an amendment to bill number 220186. A copy of the amendment has been circulated to all members of the committee. I move that the amendment to bill number 220186 be approved.
Second.
The chair notes for the record that Councilmember Gilmore Richardson seconds the motion. It has been moved and properly seconded that the amendment to bill number 220186 be approved. All those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The ayes have it. The motion carries, and the amendment to bill number 220186 has been approved. The chair now recognizes Councilmember O'Neill for a motion on bill number 220186 as amended.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that bill number 220186 as amended be reported from this committee with a favorable recommendation, and further move that the rules of council be suspended to permit first reading of this bill at the next session of council.
Second.
Second.
The chair notes for the record that Councilmember Green seconds the motion. It has been moved and properly seconded that Bill number 220186 as amended be reported from this committee with a favorable recommendation, and further moved that the rules of council be suspended to permit first reading of this bill at the next session of council. All those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? The ayes have it, and the motion carries. The chair again recognizes Councilmember O'Neill for a motion on Bill number 220261.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that Bill number 220261 be reported from this committee with a favorable recommendation, and further move that the rules of council be suspended to permit first reading of this bill at the next session of council.
Second.
The chair notes for the record that Councilmember Gims seconds the motion. It has been moved and properly seconded that Bill number 220261 be reported from this committee with a favorable recommendation, and further moved that the rules of council be suspended to permit first reading of this bill at the next session of council. All those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? The ayes have it, and the motion carries. This will conclude the business of the Committee on Labor and Civil Service today. This public hearing is recessed to the call of the chair. I want to thank members of the viewing public and all of those who took the time to join us and testify at this hearing. Thank you so much, and do have a blessed day. Special thank you to my colleagues for your patience. Have a great one.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Great hearing.